The night Kong Tae-jun laughed at his wife in front of 300 people, he didn't even realize he was doing it. That's what made it so devastating. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't angry. He was simply being himself, charming, untouchable, careless with the one person who had chosen to love him when he had nothing worth loving. Nia stood beside him in a $40,000 ballroom, wearing a smile that cost her everything, and the man she married cracked a joke that split her quietly in half. She didn't cry. She didn't leave. She stood there and laughed along with the crowd, because that's what 3 years of practice teaches a woman: how to bleed without showing the wound. But here's the question that will stay with you long after this story ends. What do you do when the person who is supposed to know you best treats you like a stranger and doesn't even notice? If this story already has your heart, stay with us. Subscribe to this channel and follow every part of Nia and Tae-jun's story until the very end, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. These stories travel farther than we ever imagined, and we want to see just how far this one goes. Now, let's begin. The gala was the kind of event that made ordinary people feel small and wealthy people feel necessary. Hanel Crown Holdings had rented the entire 42nd floor of the Meridian Grand Hotel for its annual charity fundraiser, a sleek, glass-encased room suspended above Manhattan, where the skyline pressed against every window, like a painting that never quite felt real. 300 guests filled the space in tailored black and burgundy, their laughter professional and their generosity calculated. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across the room in pieces. Servers moved between clusters of guests with the practiced invisibility of people trained never to be noticed. Nia Caldwell Kang stood near the east windows with a champagne flute she hadn't touched, watching the city below pulse with the ordinary lives of people who had no idea this room existed. She was 30 years old and beautiful in a way that didn't announce itself. Her dress was midnight blue. Tae-jun's assistant had chosen it, which was why the color was slightly wrong for her skin tone, slightly too cool where something warmer would have been extraordinary. Her hair was pinned carefully at the back of her neck. Her earrings were diamonds. Everything about her appearance communicated precisely the right message for a room full of people who paid attention to such things. The problem was that Nia had spent enough evenings in rooms like this one to understand she was not actually a guest tonight. She was scenery. She had arrived with Tae-jun 2 hours earlier, standing at his side while he worked the room with the particular ease of a man who had long ago stopped being nervous about anything. She had smiled beside him during introductions, laughed at the right moments, deflected personal questions with the reflexive grace of someone who had been fielding them for years. And then, as always happened, the business conversations had gradually pulled Tae-jun deeper into the room, while Nia remained at the edges of each circle, relevant enough to stand there, invisible enough that no one particularly noticed when she drifted away. She had learned not to take it personally. That was what she told herself, at least. Across the room, she could see Tae-jun at the center of a group of 7 men. Executives, investors, and 2 Korean government liaisons she recognized from a previous event. He was speaking with his hands slightly, which meant he was comfortable, which meant whatever deal or conversation he was navigating was going well. At 35, Kang Tae-jun had the kind of presence that rooms organized themselves around without anyone consciously deciding to do so. He was tall and sharp-featured, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he carried the specific confidence of a man who understood that the most dangerous thing in any room was usually himself. Nia had fallen in love with a completely different version of him. She was 24 when they met, not at a gala, not at any of the polished events that now defined the texture of her life, but at a county fair in upstate New York, where the fried food was questionable and the carnival games were clearly rigged and the whole thing smelled like hay and sugar and summer. Tae-jun had been 29, and he'd been wearing a plain gray t-shirt, and he had absolutely no idea how to win the ring toss. Nia had watched him fail 4 times in a row before he turned around, caught her looking, and instead of being embarrassed, just held up his empty hands and said, "I have a theory the rings are smaller than they look." She'd said, "They are. Everything here is a scam." He'd said, "Would you like to lose money with me anyway?" She had. He spilled lemonade on his shoes 20 minutes later and wiped it off with the napkin from her hand without asking, and then looked mortified afterward, and she'd laughed so hard she snorted, and he'd started laughing too. And that had been it. That had been the thing. Not the money he didn't yet have, not the power that hadn't yet found him, not the careful, deliberate person he would eventually teach himself to become, just the man who could laugh at himself in a wet shoe. She had loved that man immediately and completely. The man across the ballroom tonight had not spilled anything in years. Mrs. Kong. Nia turned. A man she vaguely recognized, silver-haired, mid-60s, the kind of confident that comes from inherited money rather than earned it, was approaching with two women flanking him like accessories. Harrison Wells, he said, extending a hand. We met at the Kimchi Foundation dinner last spring. You probably don't remember. I do, actually, Nia said, which was true. She remembered everything at these events because there was usually nothing else to do. You were arguing that modern art had lost its nerve. Wells looked pleased. I was right then, and I'm still right now. He turned slightly to include the women beside him, who smiled on cue. Your husband tells me you've been doing wonderful work in Harlem. Some kind of literacy initiative? A children's literacy center, Nia said. We run after-school reading programs, book drives, community workshops. Wonderful, Wells said, with the tone of a man who found things wonderful without finding them interesting. You must be very busy. I am, Nia said. I love it. Wells glanced across the room toward Tae-jun. He must be proud of you. Nia smiled. I'm sure he would be if he had time to ask about it. She said it lightly, the way she always said everything at these events. Just enough irony, to be honest. Not enough to be uncomfortable. Wells laughed politely. His companions laughed a half-beat later. And then Tae-jun was there. She hadn't heard him approach. She never did. He moved through rooms the way a current moved through water. You didn't notice it until you were already being carried somewhere. Harrison. Tae-jun placed one hand briefly at the small of Nia's back, a gesture that was equal parts affection and territoriality, and she had long ago stopped trying to decide which it was more. I see you found the most interesting person in the room. Wells laughed. Your wife was just telling me about her literacy work. Admirable. She's remarkable, Tae-jun said, and he meant it. Nia could hear that he meant it. But the way he said it was the way a man described a feature of his home. The custom kitchen, the view from the study. Remarkable. Correct. Requiring no further examination. Nia took a small sip of her champagne. You know, Wells said, directing this now at the broader circle that had naturally formed around them as Tae-jun arrived. I was just saying to my wife last week, your wife still looks at you the way my wife looked at me 30 years ago, like a woman hopelessly in love. It was a kind observation. It was intended as a compliment. Tae-jun glanced at Nia with that slight pull at the corner of his mouth that passed for a smile in public settings, and then he turned back to the room. My wife, he said, casually and clearly, and with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 15 years saying precisely the right thing in public settings, still believes love can change me. A beat. Then the room laughed. It was a good laugh, knowing and indulgent, the kind that said everyone in this circle understood the complicated mathematics of successful men and the women who married them. It was the laugh of shared recognition. It was the laugh of a joke that lands because everyone believes it to be essentially true. Nia laughed too. She was very good at it by then. The corners of her eyes creased naturally. Her shoulders lifted just slightly. Her expression was warm and self-aware and gave absolutely nothing away. Inside, something cracked along a line she hadn't realized was already there. The conversation moved on within seconds. Wells said something about the Tokyo real estate market. Someone else mentioned a shipping contract. Tae-jun's attention shifted with the practiced fluidity of a man conducting 15 conversations simultaneously, and Nia remained at the edge of the circle and finished her champagne, and when a server passed, she set the empty glass on the tray and took nothing else. She was not angry. That supped her, later, when she had the quiet to examine it. In previous years, a moment like that would have lit something hot and immediate behind her sternum. The particular burn of being reduced, of being made into a punchline at your own expense by the person who was supposed to protect you from exactly that. She would have spent the car ride home deciding whether to say something, the way she always spent those rides. And she would have said something or not said something, and neither outcome would have felt right. Tonight, the anger wasn't there. What was there was something quieter. and she realized with a kind of distant clarity, considerably more serious. She was tired. Not physically, not even emotionally in the sharp way that implied energy still being spent. She was tired the way a person gets tired after years of small accumulations. The missed dinners, the empty half of the bed at 2 in the morning, the conversations that began with something real and ended with Tai-jun's phone, the particular loneliness of being surrounded by your husband's world while remaining invisible inside it. She was tired, and the tiredness had a new quality to it tonight, because for the first time she looked across the circle at the man she had married and felt something close to. Not hatred, not bitterness, but a slow, quiet uncoupling, like a hand releasing a rope. Not dramatically, just letting go of the weight. She stayed through the rest of the gala because leaving early created questions she didn't have the energy to answer. She smiled the appropriate number of times. She spoke when spoken to and occasionally when not. She was, by any observable measure, the composed and gracious wife of Kang Tai-jun, and no one in that room had any reason to look closer. The convoy home was 3 black SUVs moving through Manhattan's late-night streets. Nia sat beside Tai-jun in the second vehicle, her hands folded in her lap, watching the city slide past her window. 2 of his security detail occupied the front seats. The partition between front and back was raised, but not fully. She could hear the low murmur of the driver's radio. Tai-jun was on his phone within 4 minutes of leaving the venue. He wasn't reading, he was writing, thumbs moving in the quick, deliberate pattern that meant business messages, the sharp back and forth of men who conducted their real lives in encrypted channels rather than ballrooms. His jaw was set in the particular way that meant he was thinking about something other than where he was. Nia watched him for a moment. Then she turned back to the window. She did not try to talk to him. This too had changed gradually, so gradually she couldn't have marked the exact point when it happened, but there was a time early in their marriage when she would have reached for his hand in the car, or leaned her head briefly against his shoulder, or found some small way to make the space between them feel connected, instead of just shared. She had stopped doing those things. She couldn't remember when. She only knew that at some point the reaching had started to feel like asking, and she had grown tired of asking. The Westchester estate came into view through the tinted windows, a vast stone property set back from the road behind a serious iron gate and a security perimeter that most people would have found suffocating. Nia had grown used to it the way you grew used to anything that surrounded you long enough. It no longer looked like a fortress. It just looked like home. The car stopped. Doors opened. Security personnel materialized with the silent efficiency of a choreography she had long memorized. Inside, the house was warm and lit correctly. The housekeeper always left the downstairs lights on when they were expected back from an event. In the dining room, the table had been set for 2. The good china, candles, a late dinner that the cook had prepared and left covered on warming trays. White roses in a low vase at the center of the table. Nia stood in the doorway of the dining room for a moment. Behind her, she heard Tai-jun's footsteps cross the entrance hall and then divert. Left, toward the corridor that led to his private office. She stood still and listened to the sound of his office door close. The dining room was very quiet. The candles had been burning for a while. They were already an inch lower than when they had been lit. The wax pooled neatly in the holders. The food on the warming trays smelled good. The table looked exactly as a table in a photograph of a happy marriage was supposed to look. Nia sat down. She sat there for 5 minutes, then 10, then 20. She looked at Tai-jun's place setting across from her. The folded cloth napkin, the aligned silverware, the wine glass that his staff would have filled with whatever he was currently drinking. She looked at her own hands on the table. She thought about the ballroom, the laughter, Wells's face, and then the way Tai-jun had said it, casually, cleanly, with that precise lightness that communicated he hadn't even needed to think about it. My wife still believes love can change me. A joke. Not even a cruel joke. Just a joke. The kind you make when someone hands you a line and the room is expecting you to do something with it. The kind that doesn't cost the person telling it anything at all. At 40 minutes, Nia rose from her chair. She lifted Tai-jun's plate, the warming tray beneath still faintly warm, and carried it to the kitchen. She covered it carefully, labeled it, and placed it in the refrigerator where he or the cook would find it in the morning. She did this without heat, without noise. without the particular emphasis of a woman making a point. She was simply removing an untouched plate from a table. She went upstairs. She removed the diamond earrings he had not picked out. She unclipped her hair. She washed her face in the bathroom that connected to their room, watching the water carry her makeup down the drain. In the mirror, her own face looked back at her. Tired, yes, but also strangely clear, the way a window looks after rain. She had a thought she had never quite had before. Not as a question and not as a decision. More like an observation, the kind that settles quietly when you have finally stopped fighting something you have been fighting for a long time. She thought, I have been waiting for him to come back, and I don't know if I am still waiting. She did not know what to do with that yet. She wasn't sure it required doing anything immediately. She only knew that something had shifted in her tonight. Not broken, not ended, but shifted. The way continental plates shift, slowly and with enormous consequence, in ways that take a long time to surface. She turned off the bathroom light. She got into bed. When Taejun eventually came upstairs, she didn't check the time, but it was late. The particular late of a man who disappears into his work the way other men disappear into other things. He moved through the room in the dark with the practiced quiet of someone who has learned not to wake his sleeping wife. He did not know that she was not sleeping. He did not know that she lay still in the dark and listened to him set his phone on the nightstand, remove his jacket, sit on the edge of the bed. He did not know that for several minutes she lay there and thought about the county fair and the wrong lemonade, and a man who used to laugh until his eyes disappeared, and what it meant that she could no longer quite remember the last time she had seen that man in this room. Taejun settled into his side of the bed. Within minutes, his breathing slowed and deepened. Nia lay awake for a long time. Outside, the Westchester night was very quiet. No city noise, just the occasional sound of wind in the trees and the distant mechanical hum of the estate's security system. She had hated the silence when they first moved here. She had been used to the ambient noise of the city, the sense that other lives were pressing close on all sides, that you were never entirely alone because the world was always making itself heard through the walls. Now the silence felt like something she had made her own. She thought, if I am not waiting anymore, then I need to figure out what I'm doing instead. It was not a plan. It was barely even a thought. But it was the first time in 3 years that she had considered herself as something other than a woman in relationship to a man who wasn't quite present. She closed her eyes. She did not feel sad. She felt, for the first time in a long while, like she was standing on ground that belonged to her. That frightened her a little. And it also felt, quietly and unexpectedly, like the beginning of something she hadn't been brave enough to name yet. The morning after the gala, Nia woke before the alarm. This was not unusual. She had been waking early for most of their marriage. The particular insomnia of a woman whose sleep had gradually learned to stay shallow, always half listening for a door, a phone, a footstep that would tell her the shape of the day ahead. But this morning felt different from the inside. She lay still for a moment in the gray early light, oriented herself, and then noticed something she couldn't immediately name. She was not reaching across the bed. For years, longer than she could precisely track, her first movement in the morning had been unconscious and automatic, a hand extending toward Taejun's side, not always expecting to find him there, but reaching anyway. The gesture of a woman whose body hadn't yet caught up with what her mind already knew. This morning her hands stayed where they were, folded loosely at the center of the blanket, and she just looked at the ceiling. Taejun's side of the bed was empty. This was normal. I was typically gone before 6, pulled by calls from Seoul, Tokyo, or whichever time zone was currently demanding his attention. What was not normal was that Nia looked at the empty space and felt nothing in particular. Not absence. Not the dull, familiar ache of a presence that wasn't there. Just space. A physical fact with no emotional charge attached to it. She got up. She showered, dressed, made herself coffee in the kitchen because the housekeeper didn't arrive until 8, and she liked the 20 minutes before the house filled with other people. She stood at the kitchen window with her mug and watched the back garden in the early morning. The trees were bare, it was deep November, and the light was that flat pewter color that made everything look like it was waiting for something to happen. She thought about the literacy center. There was a new book drive starting that week. She'd been coordinating with 3 Harlem elementary schools and 2 community organizations, and the logistics were still loose in places that needed tightening. She thought about Marcus, the 8-year-old who had come in 3 Tuesdays in a row and refused to read aloud because some older kids at his school had laughed at him once for mispronouncing a word. She thought about what approach she hadn't yet tried with him. She did not think about last night. Or rather, she thought about it the way you think about weather that has already passed. It happened. It had the shape it had. She could examine it clearly now without the glass getting foggy. By the time she'd finished her coffee, she had a list in her head for the day that had nothing to do with Taijun's schedule, his dietary preferences, or what time she should tell the cook to have dinner ready. She left the house at 8:15. She did not text his security team to let them know. The Literacy Center occupied the ground floor of a converted row house on 127th Street. Not a beautiful building in any conventional sense. The paint on the exterior trim was chipping in 2 places, and the front step had a crack running diagonally across it that the landlord kept promising to fix. But inside it was warm and loud in the best possible way. Nia had spent 18 months building the space from a bare room with 4 donated bookshelves into something that actually functioned. Reading nooks with mismatched but comfortable chairs, a small computer station in the corner, walls covered in children's artwork and handwritten book reviews, a lending library that now circulated over 300 titles. She arrived to find Denise, her program coordinator, already at the front desk untangling a delivery of donated books that had arrived in 3 separate boxes with no packing list. "Tell me they're sorted," Nia said. "They are absolutely not sorted," Denise said cheerfully. She was 52, had worked in Harlem community programs for 25 years, and approached organizational chaos with the serenity of someone who had made peace with the fundamental nature of donated goods. "We've got picture books mixed in with middle grade, 2 copies of a Grisham novel, and something in what I believe is Dutch." "Put the Dutch book on the display shelf," Nia said, hanging up her coat. "Kids will think it's mysterious." "Already did." Nia laughed. A real one, the kind that came from the chest, and picked up a stack of picture books to start sorting. This was what the next 4 hours looked like. Sorting books, answering emails, a phone call with the school librarian about scheduling, a grant application that needed 2 paragraphs revised, and then the afternoon reading session with 12 children between the ages of 6 and 10 who arrived in a noisy cluster from the after-school program 2 blocks over. Nia sat cross-legged on the rug and read to them for 40 minutes, and then had them read to each other in pairs while she moved between groups and listened. Marcus was there. He sat with a girl named Priya, who was a patient reader. Nia had paired them deliberately. She crouched beside them near the end of the session and watched Marcus sound out a word he didn't know, his face tight with the specific effort of a child who is used to expecting failure. When he got it right, Priya said, "See, I told you." And Marcus did not smile exactly, but the tension went out of his shoulders, and Nia cataloged that and moved on. She stayed until 6:30. When she got back to the estate, she was carrying a canvas tote bag full of grant paperwork she planned to finish at the kitchen table. She came in through the side entrance, nodded to the security personnel stationed in the corridor, and was already thinking about what was in the refrigerator when she heard voices coming from the main sitting room. Taijun's voice. And another, lower, accented, someone she didn't immediately recognize. She passed the sitting room door without slowing. Through the partially open door, she registered 2 men seated across from each other, drinks in hand, and what sounded like a conversation that had been going for a while. Taejun looked up as she passed. "Nia." His voice had the particular note it got when he was caught between 2 contexts, a slight calibration, a split-second adjustment. She stopped, stepped back to the doorway. The other man was perhaps 60, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and the watchful eyes of someone who made their living observing people in rooms. She didn't know him. "Come in," Taijun said. "I won't interrupt," she said. Her tone was even, pleasant even. "I just got back. I'll be in the kitchen." She saw something flicker across Taijun's face. Not irritation, exactly. Something less defined. He nodded once, and she moved on. In the kitchen, she set down her tote, poured herself a glass of water, and started on the grant paperwork. She could hear very faintly the murmur of conversation from the other room, the low, steady frequency of men discussing things that weren't being discussed for her benefit. She had long ago learned not to try to parse the content of those conversations. What she didn't know, she couldn't be asked about. She worked for about an hour. The other man left around 8. She heard the front door, the brief exchange with security, the car engine. Then footsteps coming toward the kitchen. Taejun appeared in the doorway. He had removed his jacket and rolled his sleeves to the elbow, which meant the formal part of his evening was done. He looked at her papers on the table, then at her. "You didn't come home for dinner," he said. "I had work." "You could have told someone." Nia set down her pen. Not forcefully, just set it down. "I wasn't aware I needed to report my schedule." "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant." He came into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Stood looking at it for a moment. "Did you eat?" "At the center." He pulled out a container of leftover rice and shut the refrigerator. His movements were controlled the way they always were. Nothing wasted, nothing careless. He set water to heat on the stove and stood with his back to her while he waited. "How was it?" he asked. Nia looked at the back of his head. "How was what?" "Your day. At the center." The question surprised her slightly, not because he had asked it, but because of when. This was the first time in recent memory that he had asked about the center without the question being a lead-in to something else, a parenthetical before the real subject. "Good," she said carefully. "There's a kid I've been working with, Marcus. He's starting to come around a little." Taejun turned with his bowl, leaned against the counter, and ate standing up. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not blank, but not open either. Something between. "What's his situation?" "Public school, overcrowded classroom, not enough one-on-one time. He's smart, but he's embarrassed about reading because someone made an example of him once, and now he locks up whenever he thinks someone's watching." Taejun ate. Said nothing for a moment. Then, "How old?" 8. He nodded once. She genuinely could not tell if he was listening or performing listening, and the fact that she could not tell used to hurt her, and now it just felt like information. She went back to her papers. He rinsed his bowl and left the kitchen. What? The weeks that followed had a particular texture to them. Not dramatic, not explosive, but grinding in the way of a slow leak rather than a burst pipe. Nia had made a change in herself so fundamental that it was reshaping the entire environment around her without announcing itself, and the effect on Taejun was one he wouldn't have been able to articulate if someone had asked. She stopped watching for his convoy. This sounds small. It wasn't. For 3 years, some part of Nia's attention had always been turned toward the sound of the front gate, the pattern of headlights on the driveway, the signal from his security detail that he was 10 minutes out. She hadn't even noticed she was doing it anymore, Shek. It had become atmospheric, like the house's own system of awareness, oriented toward his return. And then one Tuesday, she realized she had been reading for 2 hours and hadn't once thought about what time it was or whether he was on his way. She kept reading. She stopped asking the kitchen staff to keep food warm after midnight. She stopped texting his head of security, a man named Jin Ho, to ask approximate return times so she could plan her evening around them. She started eating at 7 regardless. And if Taejun was there, fine. And if he wasn't, she ate without him and felt no particular way about it. The center became the organizing center of her actual life. She was there 4 days a week, sometimes 5. She was running 3 active programs now: the after-school reading sessions, a weekend workshop series for parents and children together, and a new evening program for adult learners that had attracted 23 participants in its first month. She wrote grant applications in the evenings and made calls in the mornings, and came home with the slightly disheveled, satisfyingly tired look of a person who has genuinely used her day. People at the center knew her by her first name. They asked about her opinions and valued her answers. No one there knew who her husband was, and on the days when this was most present in her mind, she felt something close to gratitude about that. In contrast, her relationship with the estate began to feel like a hotel stay. Politely maintained, adequately comfortable, fundamentally temporary in feeling, if not in fact. Taejun noticed. He noticed the way men like him notice things. Not emotionally first, but operationally, as a disruption to an established pattern. He came home one Wednesday to find no dinner being prepared because Nia had taken the kitchen staff's standing instructions off the table. She'd told them to default to basic maintenance of the household unless given specific direction by her or by Taejun directly. He stood in the kitchen and understood without anyone telling him that this was a change. He noticed that she was no longer in the main sitting room when he worked late in his office, that if he came out at 11 or midnight looking for a glass of water, or a moment of something other than his own thoughts, the room was empty. She was either asleep or in the small study at the end of the east corridor where she'd quietly claimed a desk and a good reading lamp. He noticed that she no longer texted. This one landed differently than the others. There had been a ritual to Nia's messages. Not demanding, never demanding, but consistent. A check-in in the early evening, a quiet, "Are you okay?" Sometimes a photograph of something she'd seen during her day that she thought was worth noting. A kid's drawing. A funny street sign. Once, memorably, a pigeon with what she'd described as an attitude problem and a briefcase energy that had made him laugh out loud in a meeting and earn a sharp look from two of his senior advisors. He hadn't realized how accustomed he'd gotten to those messages until they stopped. He didn't say anything about it. He wasn't sure what he would have said. The rainy Wednesday that would become a reference point for everything that followed came 3 weeks into this new arrangement. Taejun had come back from the city early. An afternoon meeting had collapsed when one of the parties failed to appear, which happened occasionally in the kind of business where appearing sometimes created its own risks, and he arrived at the estate at 4 o'clock to find the house quiet and Nia not home. He poured himself a drink he didn't particularly want and sat in the main sitting room. The fire had been laid but not lit, someone's preparatory work left unfinished, and the room had the particular slight chill of a space that had been maintained but not lived in. He waited. At 5:40, he heard her key in the side door. She came into the sitting room, still in her coat, a canvas bag over one shoulder, her hair slightly damp from the rain. She saw him and did not startle. She registered him the way she might register a lamp that had been moved to a different position, noting the change without surprise. "You're home early," she said. Meeting fell through. I was watching her set down the bag, shrug off her coat, move through the room with the ease of someone completely at home in themselves, even when slightly soggy. "You're late." "I'm not late for anything." He felt something tighten in his chest. He kept his voice level. "I meant, you got home later than usual." I stayed to finish the grant section with Denise. She sat in the chair across from him and reached into her bag, pulling out a folder. "The deadline moved up." "You didn't call." Nia looked up from the folder. She looked at him for a moment in a way that was entirely attentive and also entirely without the anxiety that used to live around her edges when he said something with any edge in it. "You already know where home is," she said. He held her gaze. She looked back without blinking, without aggression, without performance. She just looked at him with those clear, dark eyes and waited. And he was a man who had conducted negotiations across 3 continents and could read the posture of a dangerous man from across a room, and he genuinely could not find a way in. She went back to her folder. He sat there and listened to the scratch of her pen against paper and the rain against the windows and the sounds of a house that was no longer organized around him. For the first time, it occurred to Kang Taejun that he was being outmaneuvered. Not deliberately, which would have been easier to address, but naturally, casually, by a woman who had simply stopped giving him something he hadn't realized he was receiving. He could negotiate with hostility. He could outpatient suspicion. He could wait out anger the way a stone waits out weather. But he had no mechanism for this. He didn't know how to fight someone who had stopped fighting. The Charity Winter Festival was held in the 3rd week of November in a park 2 miles from the community center, and it was the kind of event that existed entirely outside Taejun's operational world. No business angles, no donor networks, no clean strategic purpose. Just local vendors and hot cider and children in puffy coats and elderly volunteers with handmade signs. And Nia had been part of organizing it for 2 months because one of the schools in the center's network was co-hosting it. Taejun had not been invited. He had not been told he wasn't invited either. He had simply not been mentioned in the context of the event, and that invisibility carried its own information. He found out about it from Jinho, his head of security, who mentioned it in the context of Nia's afternoon schedule when Taejun asked where she was. He had his driver take him there. He did not tell anyone he was going. The park was strung with lights between the trees, not elaborate, just functional, the kind of lighting that made a cold November evening feel slightly warmer than it was. And there were probably 200 people moving through the vendor stalls and the activity stations, and the small performance area where a middle school choir was working through a set with admirable earnestness, if not perfect pitch. Taejun moved through the periphery of the crowd with Jinho 10 feet back, and two more men in a loose radius that most people wouldn't notice. He spotted Nia across the central path. She was moving toward an elderly volunteer, a woman in her 70s in a bright red coat who had stepped off the curb of the raised wooden walkway between stalls and clearly misjudged the icy step below. The woman was going down, her arms out, and she was going down fast. Nia moved. She closed the distance in 3 quick steps, got one arm around the woman's waist and caught her weight, and for 1 second, less than a second, a fraction, she was off balance herself, her feet fighting the same ice, and Taejun's brain processed woman, falling, Nia, danger, in a sequence that bypassed every layer of professional composure he possessed. He was moving before he was aware of having decided to move. He covered the ground across the path fast enough that Jinho broke into a half-jog to keep up, and he was 2 feet away when Nia found her footing and steadied the older woman fully. And he could see she was fine. Both of them were fine, the older woman laughing a little shakily, and Nia holding her arm and saying something quiet to her. But his own momentum had brought him right up to them, and Nia turned and found him standing there at close range, slightly breathless, with an expression on his face that he could not contain quickly enough. The older woman looked between them. "Oh, is this your husband, dear?" Nia looked at Taejun. His expression was already being controlled, already being put back into its regular configuration, but not quite fast enough. She had seen it. The look. The raw and unguarded second before he reassembled himself. "Yes," Nia said after a moment. "This is Taejun." He insisted on driving her home himself. He sent Jinho in the following car and put Nia in the passenger seat, and drove. Because doing something with his hands was better than sitting in the back with the partition and the enforced calm. He drove for 8 minutes without saying anything. The silence was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of a man who had something sitting in his chest and had not yet determined how to release it without losing something in the process. Finally, he said, "You could have called me." Nia had been watching the road ahead. She didn't turn toward him immediately. Why? Because something could have happened. His jaw was tight. "You could have needed me." Nia turned then. She looked at his profile in the glow of the dash lights, the rigid set of his jaw, the controlled line of his hands on the wheel, the whole machinery of a man who was used to demonstrating strength through precision rather than vulnerability. "Taejun," she said. He didn't look at her. "I have needed you for a very long time." The words did not have any particular heat in them. They were not an accusation or a weapon. They were simply a fact, stated with the flat clarity of something that has been true for so long that it no longer needs emphasis. He had no answer. He sat in that absence of an answer for the entire rest of the drive, and she let him sit in it without filling it up. And when they pulled up to the estate gate, she got out of the car before he had fully stopped and said goodnight with the same even pleasantness she had been greeting and leaving him with for weeks, and went inside. Taejun sat in the parked car for 4 minutes. Jinho, materializing outside the driver's window with a professional's imperviousness to awkward moments, waited. Taejun got out without saying anything and went inside. He went to his office. He sat at his desk without turning on his computer, without picking up his phone, without doing any of the 100 things that normally converted his restlessness into product. He sat and thought about her face when she said it. Not wounded, not angry, not performing anything for his benefit or against him. Just real. More real in that moment than anything he had said or done in months. He sat there and felt the specific discomfort of a man who has just been told a truth that his behavior has known about for a long time and which his mind has only just been forced to accept. And underneath the discomfort, underneath the tightness and the something that felt uncomfortably close to shame, there was something else, something he hadn't expected and didn't know what to do with yet. He was afraid. Not the fear he was familiar with, the alert, operational fear of danger, the calculated risk assessment that had kept him alive and solvent through a decade of business that operated on several levels simultaneously. This was different. This was the fear of a man standing at the edge of something he cannot negotiate with, cannot strategize around, cannot protect himself from by being smarter or faster or more powerful than the thing in front of him. This was the fear of loss, of actual fundamental loss, not of a business, not of a position or a leverage point, but of something he had treated like an inert fixed feature of his life for so long that he had stopped being able to see it as something that could simply cease to be there. He sat in his office and didn't move for a long time. And outside the windows, the November night pressed against the glass, and Kang Tae-jun, who had never backed away from a confrontation in his professional life, began to understand that the most serious confrontation of his life had been waiting for him at home all along, and he had been the last one to realize it. And somewhere in the east corridor, behind a closed door with a good reading lamp, the woman who had once chosen him carefully and freely was reading a book with the specific absorption of someone who had learned, at considerable cost, how to be entirely present in her own life. She did not wait to hear his office light go off. She turned her own off first. The week after the Winter Festival, Tae-jun changed his morning routine. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself or demanded acknowledgement. He simply began coming downstairs 20 minutes earlier, early enough that the kitchen was still quiet, early enough that Nia was still at the counter with her first cup of coffee before the day organized itself around her. He would pour his own coffee, which he did not normally do. There was always someone to do it, and stand at the opposite end of the counter and drink it. The first morning, Nia looked up when he came in and said nothing, just registered him and returned to whatever she was reading. He said nothing either. They stood in the same kitchen for 11 minutes without speaking, and when she rinsed her mug and picked up her bag and left, he remained at the counter and looked at the space she had occupied and tried to work out what he was doing. He wasn't sure he knew. The second morning, he said, "Cold today." Nia glanced at the window. "It's supposed to warm up by afternoon." That was all. The third morning, she beat him downstairs by 10 minutes and had already moved to the small table by the window, her coat on, clearly about to leave. "Nia." She looked up. Not cautious exactly, but measured. The look of a woman who has learned to take nothing for granted. "What time do you get to the center today?" She paused. 8:30. "What's happening at 8:30? Another pause, shorter. "Parent-teacher crossover session. We're trying to build a bridge between the school reading curricula and what we're doing after school." She watched him. "What time?" "I want to understand what you're doing," he said, straight. No elaboration, no diplomatic softening, just that. Nia looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes that he couldn't fully read. Not warmth exactly, not suspicion exactly, something more complicated than either. "Then ask," she said, and left. He stood in the kitchen for a while after the door closed. Then he called Jin-ho and rearranged his first 2 morning meetings. December arrived the way December always arrived in New York, without permission, turning the city's usual noise a register colder, the light going flat and early in the afternoons. The estate took on its winter appearance, bare trees, frost on the upper windows each morning, the particular stillness of a large property in cold weather where everything that doesn't need to be outside has retreated inside. Tae-jun had been operating on 2 tracks simultaneously for 2 weeks, and the strain of it was showing in small ways that only someone paying close attention would have noticed. On the professional track, everything ran correctly. The Hanul Crown Holdings restructuring was in its second phase, 3 hotel properties being repositioned, a shipping subsidiary being folded, and a quiet negotiation with a sole investment group that required Tae-jun's active presence across multiple late-night calls. The organization moved around him with the efficiency of something built over years and maintained through discipline, and Tae-jun moved through it the way he always had, decisive and close-lipped and several steps ahead. But something was different in the machinery of him. His second-in-command, a sharp-eyed man named Park Soo-hyun, who had worked alongside Tae-jun for 8 years, and survived doing so by being very good at reading the room, noticed it during a Tuesday briefing. Not a lapse in attention. Tae-jun's attention never lapsed, something more subtle. A pause before answering a question he would normally have answered before it finished being asked. A glance at his watch mid-conversation. Not impatient, but as if there was somewhere he was accounting for. Park said nothing about it. He was paid to be useful, not observant in ways that created friction. That Friday, Tae-jun arrived home at 6:15. This was not a scheduled early return. Nia was in the East Corridor study when she heard his footsteps in the entrance hall, and the time was wrong enough that she came to the study doorway to check. He was in the hall, still in his overcoat, on the phone. He held up a finger, 1 minute, and she nodded and went back to her desk. He finished the call in the corridor and came to the study doorway 3 minutes later. I moved the rest of the evening. She looked up from her laptop. Why? Because it could be moved. He leaned against the doorframe, not coming in, giving her the option of the space. I thought we could have dinner, actual dinner, not late. She studied him. He held her gaze without flinching, which she noted. All right, she said. It was not a warm response, but it was not a closed one either. They ate in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room. Nia's preference, unstated but registered by him when she moved toward it, and he followed without suggesting otherwise. The cook had left food, and Taejun heated it himself with the careful movement of a man who did not do this often, and was paying attention to avoid proving it. He managed without incident, which he suspected was a low bar, but cleared it. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. For the first few minutes, the conversation had the slightly stiff quality of two people relearning a language they used to know. He asked about the parent-teacher session. She explained it briefly at first, and then more when she saw that he was actually tracking what she was saying rather than waiting politely for her to finish. He asked about Marcus. She told him. He asked a follow-up question, a specific one, about what approach she'd found worked with kids who'd been publicly embarrassed in learning context, that told her he'd remembered the details of what she said the week before. She had not expected that. She answered carefully, watching him. The conversation ran for 45 minutes, which was longer than any conversation they had managed in the same room in recent memory, and when it wound down naturally, not cut off, not interrupted, just reaching its natural end, there was a moment of silence between them that was different from their recent silences. Not cold, not careful. Just two people sitting with the particular quiet of a conversation that has actually gone somewhere. Then Taejun's phone lit up on the table. He looked at it. She watched him look at it. He turned it face down. She said nothing. He said nothing. But she had seen him do it, and he knew she'd seen him, and neither of them pretended otherwise. She started to gather the plates. Leave them, he said. She looked at him. I'll do them, he said. He did. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him run the hot water and wash 2 plates and 2 sets of silverware and 2 glasses with the focused deliberateness of a man treating an ordinary task as though it required his full professional capability. He was not good at it, the efficiency wasn't there, and he held a wine glass at the wrong angle and nearly lost it. But he did it, without calling anyone, without asking where anything went. He dried his hands on the dish towel and turned and found her watching. Neither of them said anything. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere by approximately 2 degrees, and they both felt it. And Nia thought, don't trust it yet, not yet. And also beneath that, something warmer and more frightened than she wanted to examine closely. She went upstairs. He stood in the kitchen a moment longer than he needed to. The invitation came on a Monday. A cream envelope, hand-delivered by courier, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Kang Tae-jun. The annual Christmas gala hosted by the Whitmore Group. Not a charity event this time, but a straight business entertainment night. The kind of gathering where the real conversations happened in corners rather than on stage, and attendance was a signal in itself. Taejun set it on the counter when he read it. Business had its requirements. This was one of them. He would go. The question was whether Nia would be beside him, and in previous years the question would have resolved itself automatically. She was his wife, she would attend, end of consideration. The arrangement of her calendar was secondary. He found himself standing in the kitchen thinking about how to ask rather than how to inform. He found her in the study that evening. She was on a call, the relaxed professional posture of someone speaking to a Grant Foundation contact. He'd learned to read which calls were which now by her body language. He waited in the doorway. She glanced at him, held up a finger, finished the call in 2 minutes, and set down the phone. The Whitmore Christmas event, he said, December 18th. I would like it if you came. Nia leaned back in her chair. Whitmore Group. Yes. Business crowd. Yes. Like the Meridian Gala. He held her gaze. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. He did not rush it. He had learned in the past 2 weeks that rushing her produced nothing useful. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded and left the doorway. He counted that as something. 2 months ago, she would have said yes reflexively, performing the uncomplaining compliance of a woman who had negotiated herself into the habit of having no preferences. This fool, I'll think about it. was an actual person giving an actual answer. He preferred it even though it cost him something. 2 days later, Park Soo-hyun came to Tae-jun's private office at the estate with the kind of expression he wore when the news he was carrying was not the kind you delivered over the phone. Tae-jun looked at him across the desk. "Sit down," Tae-jun said. Park sat. He was a contained man, not cold, but engineered for precision in uncomfortable situations, which was part of why he had lasted 8 years in a position that burned through people. He placed a slim folder on the desk. He did not push it toward Tae-jun. He left it there and let Tae-jun decide what to do with it. Tae-jun looked at the folder, did not open it yet. "Tell me." "Song Jae-won has been meeting with the Meridian Group for 6 weeks, Park said. "We confirmed it this morning. 3 meetings in private, 2 in the city, 1 in Seoul during his October trip." The air in the room changed. Song Jae-won was the head of Haneul Crown's Domestic Operations Division, a position that gave him operational knowledge of every significant property, contract, and informal arrangement under the organization's umbrella. He had been with Tae-jun for 11 years. He had been at their wedding. Tae-jun's expression did not change. This was a practiced skill, and it served him now. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, time-stamped surveillance images taken by people who were paid to be invisible. Song Jae-won in the lobby of a building on Lexington Avenue. Song Jae-won getting out of a black car outside a restaurant in Midtown that Tae-jun recognized as a property controlled by Richard Cho, the Meridian Group's domestic liaison. Song Jae-won and 2 men Tae-jun did not recognize at a corner table in what appeared to be a late dinner with documents on the table between them. Tae-jun turned the photographs over one at a time. His hands were steady. His face was neutral. He was a man absorbing information, not reacting to it, because reaction was for later, in private, and right now the only thing that mattered was accuracy. "What's the timeline?" First contact was confirmed at October 14th. The Seoul meeting was October 21st. That's when he overlapped with your Incheon trip. Tae-jun turned another photograph. "And the Meridian Group's interest?" "The port operations," Park said, without hesitation. This told Tae-jun that Park had already thought through the architecture of it, which was correct. The Haneul Crown Port Operations subsidiary, a complex, partially documented arrangement involving 2 commercial terminals and a dozen smaller contracted relationships, was the organization's most valuable and most legally ambiguous asset. It was also the asset that required the most operational trust to maintain, because the relationships holding it together were human rather than contractual. If Song Jae-won had given the Meridian Group sufficient understanding of those relationships and their informal structure, the leverage they could apply was substantial. Tae-jun closed the folder. He placed both hands flat on the desk. He breathed through his nose once, carefully. His jaw was set in the specific configuration of a man who is holding something extremely heavy without allowing his posture to show the weight. "Who else knows this is in the folder?" he said. "Myself and the 2 men who confirmed the October 21st meeting. No one else." "Keep it that way until I tell you otherwise." He looked at Park directly. "Where's Song today?" "At the Midtown office. He has a 3 o'clock with the shipping contractors." "Let him have it." Tae-jun leaned back in his chair. A controlled movement, measured. "I want everything he has accessed in the last 60 days. Quietly. I want to understand the scope before we have any conversation with him." Park nodded. He picked up the folder and stood. "Soo-hyun." Park paused at the door. 11 years, Tae-jun said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't a statement that needed anything added to it. It was just the number released into the room. Park held his gaze for a moment. "Yes," he said. Then he left. Tae-jun sat alone. The office was quiet in the way of a well-insulated room. The world outside muffled, contained, reduced to a low frequency that you felt rather than heard. He had built this space deliberately, the way he had built most of his environments. Controlled acoustics, minimal visual clutter, nothing on the walls that was there for comfort rather than function. He looked at the wall opposite his desk for a long time. 11 years. Song Jae-won had been 24 when Tae-jun brought him in, young, sharp, willing to learn the kind of discipline that most young men only understood theoretically. Tae-jun had been building the organization then, laying its foundations in years of controlled risk and carefully chosen loyalty, and Song had been one of the foundational decisions. He had been at every significant moment. He knew the organization not as an outsider mapping its surface, but as someone who had grown alongside it, who understood its interior logic because he had helped build that logic. Which meant what he could give the Meridian Group wasn't information about the organization. It was the organization's architecture. Taejun's phone buzzed on the desk. He looked at it, a message from the Seoul office about the investment group negotiation requiring a decision by end of day. He answered it. Then he answered two more messages and made one call and handled the end-of-day decisions that the organization's momentum required, regardless of what else was happening in his life. This was the discipline that had built everything. The ability to continue functioning while absorbing impact. The refusal to allow any single crisis to disable the whole system. He did not cancel the evening. He did not tell Nia what had happened. He came downstairs at 7, and she was in the kitchen heating soup. And she looked at him when he came in with the particular alertness of a woman who had learned to read him in small signs. And he felt her reading him, and he organized his face carefully. "You look tired," she said. "Long day." She turned back to the stove. "Soup's almost ready." He sat at the kitchen table and watched her move around the kitchen. The ease of her, the total absence of performance. The specific way she handled things with a directness that had always been one of the truest things about her. And he felt, beneath the cold, controlled machinery of what was happening in his professional life, something that he could only identify as the specific grief of a man who understands that the walls he has built around himself are the same walls keeping out the one person who might have mattered. He ate the soup. They talked a little, surface things, easy things, the tentative language of two people practicing at proximity. She mentioned the Christmas festival planning at the center. He mentioned carefully that he'd rescheduled the following Thursday evening if she wanted to do something. She looked at him. Do something. Together. Dinner somewhere other than here, or here if you'd rather. Whatever you want. She was quiet for a moment. He let her be quiet. "Okay," she said. He nodded. He ate the last of his soup. She did not ask what was wrong. He did not know if this was because she couldn't see it, or because she had learned not to reach toward things he wasn't offering. Either answer said something about the distance between them that he was only beginning to take seriously. Later, in his office, he sat with the full scope of what Park had confirmed and began working through the actual consequences. Not emotionally, but structurally, the way a man thinks when the crisis is real and the margin for error is zero. Song had been careful. The timeline suggested a deliberate and patient process rather than a panicked opportunism, which meant there was a plan on the other side, a specific endgame the Meridian Group was working toward. The port operations were the key. If the Meridian Group could destabilize those relationships, through leverage, through exposure, through the right kind of pressure applied to the right informal arrangements, they could fracture the operational foundation that underpinned Haneo Crown's most significant revenue stream. What Taejun needed was to understand exactly how much Song had given them before he moved. What he was not prepared for was what he discovered at 11:15 that night, when Park sent him a secure message with a single attached document. It was a financial record, an account statement for a domestic account registered under a numbered company he did not recognize, clean registration, no obvious connection on the surface. The deposits were regular and substantial, going back 14 months. 14 months. Song Jae-won had not been recruited 6 weeks ago. He had been compromised for over a year, which meant that everything that had happened in the organization in the past 14 months, every decision made in Song's presence, every document he had accessed, every conversation conducted in his hearing had occurred in a room that was not sealed. Taejun sat very still. Then he opened the document fully and began reading every line of it with the specific focused coldness of a man who has had to learn that the most dangerous wounds are always the ones you didn't feel when they happened. At 2 in the morning, he set down the document. He looked at the wall. He thought about the gala in September. Song had been there, present for the pre-event briefing, in the room for 2 of the conversations Taejun had considered internal. He thought about the Seoul trip in October. He thought about the restructuring meetings in November, where Song had been in the room for 3 hours of strategic planning that Taejun had considered among the most sensitive of the year. He thought about the word trust, and what it actually meant in a world where an 11-year relationship could be purchased for monthly deposits into a numbered account. Then he thought about something else entirely. He thought about Naya. Not in connection to the crisis. She had nothing to do with the crisis. But the contrast presented itself to him with sudden, almost violent clarity. Song Jae-won, 11 years, trusted with everything, betraying it systematically and patiently across more than a year of carefully maintained performance. And Nia, 6 years in his life, 3 years as his wife, never once performing anything, her honesty so consistent and unguarded that he had learned to take it for granted, which was perhaps the most comprehensive failure of his life. He had spent years checking, verifying, and protecting himself from the calculated treacheries of a professional world built on leverage and self-interest. And he had gone home every night to a woman of genuine integrity and treated her like she was furniture. He stood up from his desk. He stood in the center of his office for a moment, and outside the windows the winter night was fully dark, and the estate was silent, and upstairs his wife was asleep in a bed he had spent the last 3 years failing to make her feel safe in. He went to the door of his office. He stood there. He did not go upstairs. He was not sure what he would have said or done if he had, and doing the wrong thing at the wrong moment was a mistake he could not afford, not with the organization on the edge of what he could see coming, and not with Nia in a place where a wrong move would cost him the last ground between them. He went back to his desk. He wrote 3 messages, to Park, to his legal counsel, to one other man whose specific skills were relevant to what needed to happen in the next 72 hours. And then he sat in the cold office with the documents around him and understood, with absolute and unflinching clarity, that the next phase of his life was going to require him to be a fundamentally different kind of person than the one he had allowed himself to become. The organization could survive Song Jae-won's betrayal if Tae-jun moved correctly in the next 2 weeks. The marriage could not survive another 2 months of what it had already endured. And for the first time in his adult life, Kang Tae-jun was no longer certain which of those 2 things mattered more to him. That uncertainty, for a man who had built everything on the refusal to be uncertain, was the most frightening thing that had ever happened to him in a room by himself. He picked up his phone one more time. He looked at Nia's name in his contacts. He looked at the last message she had sent him, 3 weeks ago, before she had stopped sending them. It was a photograph. A child's drawing taped to the wall of the literacy center, a family portrait in crayon, 2 tall figures and a small one between them, holding hands, rendered in the absolute confident inaccuracy of a 6-year-old who draws what love looks like rather than what people look like. She had sent it with no caption. He had not responded. He looked at it now and felt something in his chest that had no professional category and no strategic implication and served no function he could identify except to make it harder to breathe. He set the phone face down on the desk. He pressed both hands flat against the surface and held them there. Outside, December had turned the night as cold as it was going to get, and the city beyond the estate's walls was still moving, still running, still filled with people conducting the ordinary catastrophes and small salvations of their lives. And somewhere upstairs, in a bed too large for one person, Nia Caldwell Kong slept without waiting to hear whether his office light went off. She had stopped waiting. And Kang Tae-jun finally understood that the most dangerous clock in his life was not the one measuring how much time he had before the Meridian Group moved. It was the one measuring how much time he had left before the woman who had once chosen him, freely and without calculation, finished deciding that she had made a mistake. He slept 3 hours. Not in the bedroom. He didn't go upstairs. He folded his arms on the desk and put his head down at some point after 3 in the morning, and the next thing he was aware of was the gray December light coming through the office windows and the sound of the house beginning to wake around him. The distant movement of kitchen staff, the particular quality of silence that changes when people start moving through it. He sat up. His neck ached from the angle. He pressed 2 fingers against the base of his skull and held them there for a moment, feeling the tight knot of muscle that had formed overnight. His mouth was dry. His eyes felt like they'd been rolled in sand. He looked at his desk. The financial documents were still there, the photographs, the secure messages he had sent at 2 in the morning, 3 responses now waiting for him from people who work the kind of hours that don't have names. He read the responses first. Park had moved overnight. The 2 men assigned to Song Jae-won's digital access had completed their review by 4 a.m., and the scope of what they'd found was... Tae-jun read it twice, carefully, The way you reread something when your brain refuses the first pass. It was worse than 14 months. The first contact was 22 months ago, nearly 2 years. Taejun set down the phone. He stood up from the desk and walked to the window and stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the frost on the back garden. The trees were black against a white sky. A security man was making his perimeter rounds in the far corner, breath visible in the cold, moving with the patient, methodical rhythm of someone who had been doing this long enough that vigilance had become physical rather than mental. 22 months. He went through the calendar in his head. Not the formal calendar, the real one, the one that existed beneath the official schedule. 22 months ago, the Seoul acquisition, the Busan port renegotiation, the restructuring of the domestic operations division, which had required Song to have full visibility into the financial architecture of 6 subsidiary companies. The private meeting in October of last year with the 3 families from Incheon, whose cooperation underpinned the entire terminal arrangement. Song had been present, trusted, essential, for 22 months. Taejun pressed one hand flat against the cold glass of the window. He held it there. He felt the cold move through his palm and up his wrist, and he kept his hand there anyway, using the physical sensation the way you use pain sometimes, to stay anchored in a body that wants to detach from what it's being asked to process. He had a decision to make. Actually, he had several, but they organized themselves around a central one. How he moved against Song Jae-won in the next 72 hours would determine not just the operational outcome, but the kind of organization he was running and the kind of man he intended to continue being. There were several approaches available to him. The most efficient ones were also the most extreme, and he had used extreme approaches before in his professional life without particular hesitation. But he stood at the window with his cold hand against the glass and thought about what he'd realized at 2 in the morning, and about a child's crayon drawing of 2 people holding hands. And he made a decision that the version of him from 5 years ago would not have made. He would do this correctly, not mercifully. He wasn't built for mercy when the damage was this extensive, but correctly. With precision and documentation and no action that couldn't be accounted for in daylight. This was not a soft choice. It was in some ways the harder one. He took his hand off the glass. He went upstairs and showered and changed with the efficient speed of a man who has been operating on reduced resources long enough to optimize around them. He did not go to the bedroom where Naya was sleeping. He used the guest bathroom 2 doors down and dressed from a suit he kept in the closet there for travel purposes. When he came downstairs, Nia was in the kitchen. She was at the table with her coffee, coat already on. The particular posture of someone about to leave rather than just arrived. She looked at him when he appeared in the doorway, and something in her expression shifted slightly, reading the suit, the hour, the specific quality of his face. "Early," she said. "Yes." He went to the counter, poured coffee. His back was to her for a moment, and he used that moment to set his face correctly before he turned around. "I have to go into the city." "Okay." "The Thursday dinner." He turned, held the mug in both hands. "I still want to do it. If you want to." She looked at him steadily. "I said okay." "You said okay 4 days ago. Things change." "Things change," she agreed. "Thursday's still fine." He nodded, drank his coffee. She watched him with the attentive quiet of a woman who had learned that watching was more informative than asking. "You didn't come to bed," she said. "I worked late. Didn't want to wake you." A pause. "You could have woken me." He looked at her. She looked back at him. There was something in her face that wasn't quite an opening, but wasn't closed either. A narrow strip of light under a door, the kind that told you the room behind it wasn't empty. He said, "I know." And then, "I'll be home by 7. She nodded. He left. Song Jae-won arrived at the Midtown office at 9:15, which was 12 minutes later than his standard arrival time. Tae-jun clocked this from the security feed on his phone in the back of the car. 12 minutes was nothing under normal circumstances. Under these circumstances, it told Tae-jun that Song was not yet aware of what the last 24 hours had uncovered, because a man who knew what was coming would not be 12 minutes late to his own professional last day. He would either not come at all, or he would come early, trying to get ahead of something. Song was 12 minutes late and presumably had no idea. Tae-jun had Park run the Morning Standard while he handled 2 calls from Seoul that were legitimate and urgent, and which he processed with complete professionalism, while a separate layer of his attention was running the architecture of the next 6 hours in parallel. This was a skill he had spent 15 years developing, the ability to operate on multiple cognitive tracks simultaneously without either track degrading. It served him now. At 10:45, Taejun's car pulled up to the Midtown office building. He went in through the main entrance, which was not his usual approach. He typically used the private access on the north side. Walking through the main lobby meant being visible, meant the receptionist and the two associates who happened to be crossing toward the elevator saw him and had to manage their surprise at his unannounced arrival. He took the elevator to the 14th floor. Park was waiting outside his private office. He fell into step beside Taejun without speaking. They went into the office. Taejun took his coat off and hung it himself and sat behind the desk. Where is he now? Conference room B. In a contract review with the shipping team. Has been since 9:30. When does it break? Scheduled for 11. Taejun looked at his watch. 8 minutes. When it breaks, bring him here. Don't tell him why. Don't give him anything to work with. Park nodded. And Soohyun? Taejun's voice was flat and very controlled. I want you in the room. Park looked at him. He understood what this meant. That Taejun was going to conduct this conversation with a witness, which was not how things of this nature were typically handled. Of course, he said. He left. Taejun sat alone for 8 minutes. He did not review documents. He did not check his phone. He sat with his hands on the desk and his eyes on the middle distance, and he went through what he knew, what he needed to confirm, and what the conversation had to accomplish in order for the next steps to proceed correctly. He thought about 11 years. He thought about Song at the wedding, standing in the front row on Taejun's side, the only man there who had been with him through the years before the money and the formal power, who had seen the organization built from its actual foundations. He thought about the early years of work, the relentless building, the moments when loyalty had been the most valuable currency, and Song had seemed to have it in abundance. 22 months. The knock at the door was Park's. 2 quick professional raps. Come in. The door opened. Song Jae-won entered first. He was 53, lean, with close-cut silver hair and the kind of face that had always communicated reliability. He was carrying a tablet. He'd come straight from the contract review, exactly as intended. His face in the first moment of seeing Taejun behind the desk went through a rapid sequence. Surprise, adjustment, the particular calibrated smoothness of a man who had been managing 2 realities simultaneously for 22 months and was therefore extremely practiced at rapid calibration. Taejun. A slight warmth in the tone. The familiar address, used precisely because it was familiar. I didn't know you were coming in today. I know. Taejun gestured to the chair across the desk. Sit down. Song sat. Park closed the door and stood to the left of it. Song glanced at Park, registered his position. His face did not change, but Taejun saw the slight adjustment. A millimeter of tension entering the line of Song's jaw. A fractional recalibration of his posture. It was extremely subtle. It was also confirmation because an innocent man would have been simply puzzled by the arrangement rather than recalibrating against it. Taejun placed both hands flat on the desk. October 14th, he said. Lexington and 53rd, 11:20 in the morning. You were wearing a gray overcoat and you went in through the Madison Avenue side entrance of the Halloran building. Who were you meeting? The silence lasted 4 seconds. Song said, a personal contact, an old friend. His name? Another 2 seconds. David Park. He works in finance. David Park. Taejun said the name the way you'd set down something you had no interest in keeping. October 21st, Seoul. The Gwanghwamun District Restaurant, private room. The 2 men across the table. Who were they? Song's jaw tightened. Visibly this time, the control starting to cost more than it was worth. Taejun, the names. I don't know what you think you have. The names, Jae-won. The use of the familiar form, not the professional address, the personal one. The name from 11 years of history landed in the room differently than any of the factual questions had. Song felt it. Taejun saw him feel it, the way a precise instrument sometimes hurts more than a blunt one. Song set his tablet on the desk. He placed his hands beside it. He looked at Taejun across the surface of the desk, and Taejun looked back, and the room was absolutely still. You already know their names, Song said quietly. Yes. Then why? Because I need to hear what you do when I ask you. Taejun's voice had not changed in volume or temperature. It was the same even register it had been since the conversation started, and that steadiness was more frightening than anything louder would have been. I need to understand what version of this you're going to try. Song looked at him for a long time. Then something happened in his face. Not a collapse exactly, but a settling. The 2 years of maintained performance finally encountering a surface it couldn't adhere to. Meridian made contact first, Song said, 22 months ago, an intermediary. They had something from before, something I'd done before I came to you, before any of this. His hands moved on the desk, a small, contained gesture. They would have used it. I had no... You had a choice, Taejun said. Room. You had a choice, Taejun repeated, and this time there was something underneath the evenness, a low frequency that Park, standing at the door, recognized and which caused him to stand very still. You could have come to me, day one, hour one. You could have come to me. Song's eyes dropped to the desk. I know. You chose not to. I thought I could manage it, keep it contained. Give them enough to stay satisfied without giving them anything that actually... Boryong Terminal, Taejun said it flatly. Song's head came up. The Boryong Terminal negotiation, Taejun said. November of last year. You were in the room for 4 hours. The informal arrangement with the 3 Incheon families was discussed in detail. 2 weeks later, the Meridian Group's domestic acquisition team began positioning in the Boryong Port District. He watched Song's face. Tell me what you gave them that wasn't important. Song said nothing. Tell me. Song stopped. He pressed his lips together. He looked like a man who has arrived at the edge of something and can finally see clearly what's below, and the clarity is worse than the uncertainty was. I'm sorry, he said. The 2 words fell into the room and sat there. Taejun looked at him. Song Jae-won, 53 years old, 11 years of built trust. A man who had been present for the founding of something and had chosen, under pressure and over time, to help dismantle it from the inside. He looked at him and tried to find something, anger maybe, or the clean simplicity of contempt, that would make the next part easier. He found grief instead. Not soft grief, not the kind that forgave anything, but the specific grief of a man who has had to accept that his own judgment, which he trusted above most things in the world, had failed him in a fundamental way. You're going to give Park everything, Taejun said. Every communication, every contact, every piece of information you transmitted, and everything you know about what they did with it. You'll do it today. You'll do it completely. And then our lawyers will determine what comes next. Song nodded, once. His hands were shaking slightly. Barely visible, but there. Taejun stood up. If there's anything incomplete in what you give him, I will know. And what comes after that will not involve lawyers. He said it without heat and without emphasis. He said it the way you state a physical law. Do you understand? Yes, Song said. Taejun picked up his coat. He walked out of his own office and did not look back. He stood in the corridor outside for 30 seconds with one hand against the wall. His heart was hitting harder than it should have been. Not the adrenaline spike of physical danger, but something more sustained, the deep physiological response to a kind of stress that the body doesn't distinguish from threat. He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. He felt the wall under his palm, solid, textured, real. Then he straightened. He had 9 hours before Thursday became an impossibility, and 3 major decisions to make before 5 o'clock. And if he allowed this morning to destroy his operational capacity for the rest of the day, then Song's betrayal would accomplish more damage than it had any right to. He walked down the corridor. He made the 3 decisions in 90 minutes, 2 calls, 1 meeting with the legal team that lasted 40 minutes, and produced a document he signed and a series of actions that would begin rolling out quietly before the close of business. He was precise and thorough and gave the legal team the specificity they needed while disclosing the minimum necessary for each person in the room. At 2:15, he sat alone in a smaller office off the main corridor, and his phone buzzed with a message from Park. Song has begun. This is going to be a long session. He sent back 2 words. Stay with him. Then he sat there. He thought about the Whitmore Christmas event, 4 days out. He thought about the Thursday dinner, which was tomorrow now, and which he had committed to, and which he had no intention of canceling regardless of what the next 24 hours looked like. He thought about Nia's face that morning, the narrow strip of light under the door, the specific sentence, "You could have woken me." He had not understood, until approximately 2 in the morning last night, what that sentence was actually offering. It was not a complaint. It was not a criticism. It was an open door. She was still, despite everything, despite 3 years of accumulating evidence that he was not the man she had married and not the man she deserved, leaving a door open. Not wide open, not without conditions or cost or the considerable weight of everything that had been lost, but open. He had spent 3 years walking past open doors. He pulled up his phone and, for the first time in several weeks, opened their message thread. He looked at the blank space below her last message, the crayon drawing, no caption, sent and not answered. He looked at the blinking cursor. He typed, "I've been thinking about what you said this morning. I didn't want to wake you because I thought that was the considerate choice. I think I've been making that choice for a long time without understanding it's the wrong one. I'll be home by 7. He read it twice. He sent it. Then he put his phone in his pocket and went back to work. She responded at 4:53 while he was in a car heading back to Westchester. He felt his phone buzz and looked at it with a specific quality of attention he did not usually bring to incoming messages. Her response was 5 words. "I'll be there at 7. He looked at it. He looked out the car window at the city passing. Midtown giving way to the bridge, the cold late afternoon light flattening everything to silhouette. "I'll be there." Not, "I'll be home." She had lived in that house for 3 years. Home was the word she would have used automatically, before. She had used there. A pointed word, a word with distance in it, but also presence. She was choosing to be where he was going to be. That choice was still being made. He arrived at the estate at 6:40. He had 20 minutes. He changed. He went to the kitchen and confirmed with the cook what he'd arranged in the morning. A simple dinner, not elaborate. Nothing that communicated effort through excess. He adjusted 2 things and thanked her and asked her to have everything ready by 7:15, and then he waited. Nia came through the side door at 6:58. She was wearing her coat still, a canvas bag on one shoulder, the slightly end-of-day looseness about her that he had come to recognize as the version of her that was most actually present. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at him standing there. "You're here," she said. "I said 7. People say things." He held her gaze. "Not anymore." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she set down her bag and took off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. Her hook, not the formal coat closet in the entrance hall, and came into the kitchen. The dinner was simple. That had been his first decision. Not the flowers he'd almost ordered. Not the restaurant reservation he'd made and then canceled because a restaurant was a performance, and he didn't want to perform. He wanted to actually be somewhere with her. A table he'd set himself imperfectly. 2 plates he'd chosen from the everyday stack rather than the formal china. A single candle because the room needed light, not because it communicated something. She looked at the table and then at him, and he watched her read it. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He poured water for both of them and sat across from her, and they looked at each other across the small table and the candle between them. And Tae-jun felt the particular weight of everything he hadn't said in 3 years pressing against the inside of his sternum. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay. Not about tonight. About, this is something I should have said a long time ago, and I've been deciding how to say it. And I don't think there's a version that sounds good, so I'm going to say it without that." Nia put both hands around her water glass, watching him. Not performing calm, actually calm, the kind that comes from having processed so much already that there isn't a great deal of shock left in reach. "I haven't known what to do with you," he said. "That sounds, I know how that sounds, but it's accurate. You are not something I know how to manage. You're not something I can negotiate with or strategize around or protect by building walls around. And I spent a very long time trying to figure out which of those things would work, and none of them did. And instead of understanding that, I just withdrew. I worked. I did the things I was good at and I let the things I wasn't good at go unaddressed. He stopped. She was still looking at him. Her face was very still. I told 300 people that you believed love could change me, he said, and I made a joke out of it. I've been thinking about that since that night, about what I was actually saying. I think I was saying it because it was easy, because it was a way of telling the room that I knew better than that I was too smart to be changed by something as impractical as love. And I think that was the most honest thing I said that night, and also the worst. The candle moved slightly in the ventilation from somewhere in the room. His shadow shifted on the wall. I don't know how to fix what I've done, he said. I don't know if fix is even the right word. I know I have been. I know I have not been who you deserved. And I know I've known that for a while, and I kept telling myself there was a later date when I would address it, which is the same thing as not addressing it. Nia's eyes hadn't moved from his face. Taejun. He stopped. Why now? She said. Her voice was quiet and completely direct. What happened? He looked at her. The question was precise, and she knew it was precise. She was not asking what had changed in him emotionally. She was asking what event, what collision with reality, had produced this specific conversation on this specific evening. He thought about Song Jae-won. He thought about 22 months. He thought about what it meant to be surrounded by people who performed loyalty while delivering its opposite. Something happened today that reminded me what it costs to take someone's honesty for granted, he said. She was quiet. That's all I can tell you right now. But it was significant. And it clarified something that I think I've known for a while and been avoiding. What? He looked directly into her eyes. That you are the only person in my life who has never performed anything for me, who has never told me what I wanted to hear, or positioned themselves, or calculated the value of my goodwill before deciding what to say to me. His voice was steady, but it was costing him to keep it that way, and she could see that it was costing him, which he had not intended her to see, but also could not stop. Everyone else, professionally, socially, everyone else is doing math when they talk to me. You never have. And I treated it like it was just a thing you did rather than something extraordinarily rare. And I'm telling you this now because I'm afraid. The last word was barely above his normal speaking volume, but it landed in the room like something physical. Nia inhaled. Of what? She said. Of being on the other side of the only honest relationship I've ever had. The silence stretched. Nia looked at him, really looked, the kind that takes inventory rather than just receiving an impression. She looked at his hands on the table, not controlled now, not the careful flatness he deployed in professional settings, just hands. She looked at his face, which was doing something she had not seen it do in years. Nothing. No management, no calibration. Just a face, holding a question it genuinely did not know the answer to. She looked at him for a long time. I want to believe you, she said finally. I know. That's not the same as believing you. I know that too. She released a breath through her nose. It wasn't a sigh. It was something more specific, the sound of a person setting down something heavy. I stopped waiting for you, she said. That's real. I can't go back to being the woman who kept your plate warm and checked your schedule and organized her whole life around when you might show up. I can't do that again. I don't want to. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you because you need to understand it's not reversible, she said, and her voice was clear and a little fierce in the way it got when she was saying something she had earned. The woman who sat at that table every night waiting for you, she's gone. Whatever we are after this, it's different, or it's nothing. Different, he said without hesitation. She held his gaze. You don't even know what that means yet. No, he said, but I know it's what I want to learn. The candle between them had burned down another quarter-inch. The dinner sat mostly untouched. Neither of them had reached for it. They had both moved past the point where eating felt like the relevant activity. Nia looked at her water glass, then back at him. Okay, she said. 2 letters. 1 word. The weight of it was everything. Okay, he said. They sat there. And then, quietly, without ceremony, she reached for her fork and he reached for his, and they ate a mostly cold dinner at a small table with a single candle between them. And the conversation that followed was imperfect and occasionally awkward, and once almost funny when he knocked his water glass with his elbow, and caught it with the specific graceless lurch of a man with no dignity left to protect. She laughed. Not the ballroom laugh, the real one. The one from the chest. He looked at her and felt something in his chest that had been contracted for 3 years open by approximately 1 degree. It wasn't enough. He knew that. 1 degree was not a healed marriage. 1 degree was not the recovery of years of accumulated distance and mishandled trust, and all the ordinary moments that had accumulated into an extraordinary loss. 1 degree was just a beginning. He had never wanted anything as simply and completely as he wanted to be worth that beginning. The Whitmore Christmas Gala was 4 days later. He had not told Nia what was happening with Song Jae-won. The situation was still in motion. Park's sessions with Song had extended across 2 days, and the legal team was building its response with the deliberate pace of people who understood that a rushed move against a 22-month-old problem would do more damage than it undid. Taejun was managing it in compartments, as he managed everything, and the professional crisis was contained enough that he could maintain the boundary between his worlds. But on the morning of December 18th, he received a call that broke the containment. He was shaving when his phone rang. He looked at the screen, a number he recognized but had not expected to hear from. He set down the razor. "This is Kong." "Mr. Kong?" The voice on the other end was American, precise, and carrying the particular quality of a man who is being careful with every word. "My name is Daniel Whitmore. We've met. I'm calling because something's happened that you need to know before tonight." Taejun was still. "Go ahead." "My firm was approached 6 days ago by a representative of the Meridian Group. They are under the impression, apparently, that I have a relationship with you that gives them leverage with me. They wanted information about your company's domestic operational structure." A pause. "I told them nothing, and I'm telling you this because I believe in the way business should be conducted, and because what they were attempting is not that." Taejun's jaw was very tight. "What specifically did they ask for?" "The port operations arrangement, the structure of the informal relationships in the Boryong district. They had significant detail already, Mr. Kang, the kind that doesn't come from research." "No," Taejun said, "it doesn't. I thought you should know before tonight. Whether you attend is of course entirely your decision." Taejun looked at himself in the mirror above the sink, half-shaved, the small cut on his jaw from when the phone rang, blood already beating at the surface and beginning to track down in a thin line toward his chin. "I'll be there," he said. "Thank you, Daniel." He hung up. He pressed a towel to the cut on his jaw and held it there. He looked at his own face in the mirror, the blood seeping into the white towel, the half-finished shave, the eyes of a man who had just understood that the Meridian Group was not waiting for him to make the first move. They were already at the table. They had been at the table for 6 days, working the perimeter of his professional world, using Song's information to map his relationships and identify the pressure points. The Whitmore approach was a test, seeing whether the information they'd bought for 22 months could be leveraged at the social level, turned from intelligence into influence. They were moving faster than he had anticipated. He finished shaving. He dressed. His hands were controlled and deliberate, the precise movements of a man who uses physical tasks to hold his mental state in place. He knotted his tie in the mirror, and the cut on his jaw had stopped bleeding but left a slight mark, and he looked at it and decided it was not worth addressing further. He knocked on the bedroom door. Nia called him in. She was standing at the window in a deep green dress he had not seen before. Not from Taejun's assistant's choices, clearly, something she had selected herself. Something that was entirely right in the way that things you choose for yourself tend to be right in a way that choices made for you rarely manage. Her hair was down. She had diamond studs in her ears, small ones. She turned when he came in and looked at him, then at his jaw. "You cut yourself." Phone rang. She went to the bathroom and came back with a small piece of medical tape and pressed it over the cut with 2 fingers, her face close to his, her attention entirely on the task. He held very still. He could feel the warmth of her hands, the slight pressure of her fingertips, the specific closeness of a person who is touching you with purpose rather than sentiment. She stepped back and looked at her work. "Better." "Thank you." She turned to pick up her evening bag. He watched her and thought about what was waiting for him at the Whitmore event and about what he was choosing to bring her into, and something moved in him that was part protectiveness and part honesty, and he said, "Nia." She turned. Tonight might be complicated, he said. She looked at him. Complicated. There's a situation, professional. It's in progress and it's possible. It's likely that there will be people at the event tonight who are part of it, who are positioned against me. She was absolutely still. Are you safe? The question landed squarely. No preamble, no reaching for implications. Just the direct question, asked with the clear precision of a woman who wanted a straight answer. Yes, he said. It's not that kind of situation. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, do you want me there? Yes, he said, and the directness of it surprised even him. Not for appearances. I want you there because I want you there, but you should know it might not be a comfortable evening. Nia looked at him. She looked at the small piece of medical tape on his jaw. She looked at his hands at his sides, controlled, contained, the whole architecture of a man who is managing something significant and choosing, for the first time, not to manage it alone. Then let's go, she said. The Whitmore event occupied the top 2 floors of a building in the financial district that Tae-jun had always found aggressively symbolic. 200 guests, a private jazz ensemble, and the particular ambient pressure of a room where everyone was measuring everyone else's presence against their own. He arrived with Nia at 8:15. She moved through the entrance with the ease of a woman who had attended enough of these events to have lost her awe of them, and he noticed, as he had begun to notice such things, that she held his arm lightly but not dependently, beside him, not behind him. He saw Richard Cho within 4 minutes of arriving. Cho was across the room, speaking with 2 men Tae-jun recognized as meridian adjacent, not leadership, but orbit. Cho was 58, with the unhurried ease of a man who believed he held better cards than his opponent. He saw Tae-jun from across the room approximately when Tae-jun saw him. He did not look away. Neither did Tae-jun. Someone you know? Nia said quietly, beside him. Someone who thinks he does, Tae-jun said. He steered them toward the bar, got drinks they neither particularly needed, and managed the next 40 minutes. The way you manage a room where the most important conversation is the one you haven't had yet, working toward it deliberately, letting the social geography of the event bring the right people into proximity without forcing it. At 8:57, Richard Cho crossed the room toward him. Nia felt Tae-jun's arm shift slightly under her hand. Not tension exactly, but a realignment, the physical equivalent of someone squaring their footing. Cho stopped 2 feet away. His eyes went to Nia, a brief, assessing look, and then to Tae-jun. Kang Tae-jun. He said it with the warmth of a man who had decided that warmth was the most aggressive available option. I've been hoping we'd have a moment. I know, Tae-jun said. Cho smiled. Your wife? To Nia. Lovely to meet you, Richard Cho. Nia said, Nia Kang, and nothing else, her voice pleasant and her eyes clear and giving him nothing. Cho's attention returned to Tae-jun. I wonder if we might find a quieter spot, briefly. Anything you'd like to say to me, Tae-jun said, his voice even and carrying. You can say here. Cho's smile held. That's a position I'd think carefully about. I have thought carefully. Tae-jun looked at him with the specific directness of a man who no longer has anything to protect by being indirect. I know what you've been building for 22 months. I know what you paid for it, and I know what you've been doing with it in the last 6 days, including the conversation you attempted with Daniel Whitmore. He watched Cho's face for the tell, a fractional tightening around the eyes, almost imperceptible. You went to his event tonight because you expected the information to give you a standing position. It won't. The access you purchased is closed. What you've already used is documented, and where you've applied it is on the record. Cho said nothing. You built a position, Tae-jun said, on a foundation that no longer exists. I'd think carefully about what you've already put in motion. The jazz ensemble reached the end of a piece, and the applause was brief and polite. And in the silence that followed, Cho and Tae-jun stood 2 feet apart, and the room moved around them with no awareness that the most significant exchange of the evening was happening in what looked like a perfectly civil conversation between 2 men at a party. Cho leaned slightly forward. The warmth was gone. You're not the only one with documentation, Kang. I know that too, Tae-jun said. Bring it. Cho straightened. He looked at Tae-jun for a long moment. Then his eyes moved, briefly, deliberately, to Nia. Taejun felt it like a current through his arm. The look was a message, that she was a variable, that she was something that could be made into leverage, that the kind of people Cho worked for were perfectly comfortable reaching into someone's personal life if the professional routes were blocked. The room did not change. The jazz ensemble started again. Someone laughed across the room. Taejun looked at Cho, and the look on Taejun's face was not anger. It was something considerably more dangerous than anger. It was absolute, cold certainty, the expression of a man who has just recalculated everything at stake and arrived at a new answer. "We're done here," Taejun said. He took Nia's hand, not grabbing it, not the proprietary reflex of a man asserting ownership, but a deliberate and real act, his hand finding hers and holding it. And he walked them both away from Richard Cho with the unhurried step of a man who will not be seen to leave in any way that resembles retreat. Nia walked beside him without breaking stride, without asking, without pulling away. When they reached the far side of the room, she said very quietly, "Are we leaving?" "Not yet," he said. 5 more minutes. And then yes." She looked at his profile. "What just happened?" He turned to look at her. The medical tape was still on his jaw. His eyes were doing something she hadn't seen in them before. Not the professional blankness, not the managed control, but something live and present and directed entirely at her. "I made a choice," he said, "about what matters more." She looked at him. "It's you," he said. "Whatever happens next, professionally, legally, all of it, you are what I am not willing to lose. And I need you to know that before any of the rest of it becomes clear, because I want it to be separate from the outcome. I want you to know it when the outcome is still uncertain." The music played. The room moved. Nia looked at the man who had laughed at her in front of 300 people 2 months ago, and she looked at this man standing before her in the same suit and the same face and the same life, and she tried to find the join between those two versions, the seam where one became the other. She found it. It was not clean. It was not a transformation or a conversion or any of the dramatic ruptures that stories use to mark the moment a person changes. It was something slower and more real. A man who had spent 3 years moving away from her, stopped, looked back, and was now taking the first steps of what would be a long and imperfect and genuinely uncertain journey back. She held his hand. 5 minutes, she said. He nodded. And outside the Whitmore building, in the December cold that neither of them could feel yet from inside this room, the city went on being the city. Enormous and indifferent and full of the lives of other people making their own choices between what was safe and what was real. While inside, Kang Taejun and Nia Caldwell Kong stood side by side in a room full of people who would never understand what had just changed between them. And the clock on everything that needed to happen next had already started running. They left the Whitmore event at 9:20, not hurrying, not retreating. Taejun collected their coats himself from the coat check, handed Nia hers, and they walked out through the lobby and into the December cold with the unhurried pace of two people who had decided the room behind them no longer held anything worth staying for. The doorman held the door. The city hit them immediately. The cold, the noise, the particular smell of Manhattan in winter that was exhaust and wet concrete, and somewhere, improbably, roasting chestnuts from a cart half a block away. Nia pulled her coat closed. Taejun's car was already waiting. Jinho had read the exit without being called, which was why he'd lasted 11 years in the position. The rear door opened as they approached. They got in. The partition was up. The car moved into traffic. For a minute, neither of them spoke, and the silence was not the careful, managed silence of recent months, but something rawer. The silence of two people who had just been through something together and were still processing what together meant. "Tell me what's happening," Nia said. Not a demand, a request. The difference mattered. Taejun looked at her in the low light of the car's interior. She was looking at him with her hands in her lap and her face clear and direct, and he thought about all the versions of this conversation he had avoided having, all the times he had chosen the sealed compartment over the open room. And he made a decision. He told her. Not everything. There were operational details she didn't need and legal specifics that were better left sealed. But the shape of it. Song Jae-won, 22 months, the Meridian Group and what they'd been building with what they'd purchased, what Whitmore had called to tell him, what had happened in the room tonight and why Cho's look at her had communicated exactly what it communicated. He spoke for 11 minutes without interruption. Nia listened with the particular quality of attention she brought to things that mattered. Not passive, not performing engagement, but genuinely present, tracking the shape of what he was telling her, filing the pieces against each other. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How bad is it?" she said. "The port operations can be protected if we move correctly in the next 2 weeks. The legal exposure is manageable. The informal relationships with the Inchin families are the most vulnerable. Those are human relationships, and humans respond to leverage differently than contracts do." And Song. The name sat in the car between them. "He'll face consequences," Taijun said. "Legal ones, real ones." "Does it hurt?" she said. He looked at her. "That it was him," she said. 11 years. "Does it hurt?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside the car, the city moved past in segments of light and dark. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She didn't offer anything around it. No consolation, no minimization. She just received the answer. "Cho looked at me," she said. "Yes." "He was telling you I was a liability." "He was testing whether you were a leverage point," Taijun said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "A leverage point is something that can be used. A liability is something you're ashamed of." He held her gaze. "You are not either of those things to me. I needed you to know that when the outcome was still uncertain, which is what I told you in there." Nia looked at him for a long time. "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I'm still in this car." The next 2 weeks were the most demanding of Taijun's professional life, and he went through them differently than he had gone through any previous crisis. The legal team filed 3 separate motions in the first week: a protective filing for the port operations structure, a formal complaint lodged against 2 Meridian-linked entities for interference with business relationships, and a preliminary document establishing the timeline of Song Jae-won's disclosure of confidential information. The filings were precise and extensively documented, built from the 60-day access review and from Song's own 4-day disclosure session with Park. Song had been thorough. Taejun had told him to be thorough, and he was, with the specific cooperativeness of a man who understood that cooperation was the only remaining currency he had. What Song gave them was complete enough to construct a clear picture of what the Meridian Group had and what they'd done with it, which meant Taejun's legal team could move with accuracy rather than assumption. The Inchin families were the hardest part. 3 separate conversations, each requiring Taijun to be present himself, not a proxy, not a representative, him, and each requiring a different calibration. The eldest of the 3 heads of family, a man named Ha Sung-jin, who was 71 and had been in the port business for 40 years, received Taijun in his home in Incheon on a Tuesday morning in the 2nd week. They sat in Ha's study and drank tea that was too hot to drink quickly, and Taijun laid out what had happened with the specificity that the situation required, and without managing the older man's reaction, which he had learned from experience, was the only way to conduct a conversation with someone who had been in business long enough to smell the management from across a room. Ha listened. He asked 4 questions, all of which were precise and none of which were rhetorical. Then he was quiet for a long time. "You came yourself," Ha said finally. "Yes." "You could have sent the lawyer, or Park." "Yes." Ha looked at him. "Why didn't you?" Taejun thought about the honest answer and gave it, "Because this situation was built on someone I trusted misusing access I gave him. The least I could offer was my own presence, rather than a representative." Ha looked at him for a moment longer. Then he picked up his tea. "The Meridian Group approached my 2nd son last week," he said. Taejun went very still. "He told me," Ha said, "immediately." He drank his tea. "My son is not Song Jae-won." Taejun held the older man's gaze. "No," he said, "he isn't." "The arrangement stands," Ha said, "on the condition that you conduct the next 6 months with the same directness you've brought to this room today." "Understood," Taejun said. He flew back from Incheon that evening. He landed at JFK at 11:15 and was in a car by 11:30 and home before 1. The house was mostly dark. He came in through the side entrance, shed his coat, and was moving toward the stairs when he saw the light on in the East Corridor study. He went to the doorway. Nia was at her desk, papers spread in front of her, reading glasses on glasses she'd started wearing for close work in the last year, and which he'd noticed for the first time approximately 3 weeks ago, with the specific quality of a man realizing how much he had stopped paying attention to. She looked up when he appeared. "You're late," she said. "The Inchin meeting ran long." She looked at his face. "How did it go?" "The arrangement stands." He leaned against the door frame. "Ha's second son was approached by Meridian last week." She inhaled. "And?" He told his father immediately. Nia held his gaze. That must have meant something. "It did." He looked at her. "I'm going to get some water. Do you want anything?" She took off her glasses. "I'll come." They sat in the kitchen at 1 in the morning with mugs of tea they didn't particularly need, and Taijun told her about Ha Sung-jin. Not the business details, but the man. The study with its 40 years of accumulated weight. The 4 precise questions. The way he'd said, "My son is not Song Jae-won," is a statement of fact rather than a comfort. Nia listened. She asked one question about Ha's son, which was the right question, and he answered it. When the tea was gone, they stayed at the table a moment longer than the tea required, and the kitchen was warm and the rest of the house was dark and quiet. And Tae-jun looked at his wife across the small table and felt something that he had no professional category for, the specific, ordinary, irreplaceable feeling of being somewhere he was supposed to be. "You should sleep," Nia said. "I know." Neither of them moved immediately. Then she stood, rinsed her mug, set it on the rack. She passed his chair on the way to the door, and her hand, briefly, without ceremony, came to rest on his shoulder for 2 seconds before she continued out. 2 seconds. The weight of a hand. He sat there after she'd gone and held very still. The Meridian Group's response to the legal filings came in the 3rd week of December, and it was not what Tae-jun had expected. They withdrew. Not entirely. They filed a counterclaim through a domestic subsidiary that was technically legitimate and factually thin, the kind of document you file to establish a position rather than because you believe it will succeed. But the primary pressure they had been building through Song's information simply stopped. No further approaches to Hanul Crown's network contacts. No additional attempts to leverage the port relationships. The Lexington building that had hosted 2 of Song's meetings went quiet in Tae-jun's surveillance reports. Park brought this to him on a Wednesday morning with the careful expression of a man who wasn't sure whether the news was good or a different kind of problem. "Why?" Tae-jun said. "2 possibilities," Park said. 1. They've decided the position they built is too exposed now that we know its architecture. What they had was valuable as a surprise. Once documented, it's a liability for them. And 2? They're positioning for something else, pulling back here to create movement somewhere we're not looking. Tae-jun considered both. "What does the monitoring show?" "No unusual movement. Seoul is quiet. The Boryong district has been still for 6 days. He sat with it. "Keep the monitoring at current levels through January. If it's genuine withdrawal, we'll see it in the pattern. If it's positioning, we'll see that too." Park nodded. He started to leave. "Soo-hyun." Park stopped. "You managed the Song situation correctly," Tae-jun said. "All of it. I want you to know I know that." Park was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said. And then, with the slight awkwardness of a man who was better at competence than sentiment, "He was my friend too." "I know," Tae-jun said. Park left. Tae-jun sat in his office and thought about that. The quiet devastation of it, the way Song's betrayal had not been a single event but a slow recontextualization of 11 years, every memory now carrying a question mark. He thought about the wedding, the early years, the moments he had thought were shared experience and which had apparently been, at least in part, observed from a distance by a man who had already begun calculating their value to someone else. He thought about what it cost to trust people. And then, because he had become a man who was learning to do this, he thought about what it cost not to. Christmas arrived. It arrived differently than it had in previous years. In previous years, Christmas at the Westchester estate had been an elaborate and somewhat melancholy production. The house decorated to a high professional standard by people who were paid to do it, a tree of considerable height selected and installed by the same, and Nia moving through the preparations with the specific determined investment of a woman who was trying to build something real inside an arrangement that kept offering her surfaces. This year, Taejun asked if he could help. He asked on the 1st of December, which was early enough that she looked at him with something that was equal parts suspicion and curiosity, and said, "Help with what specifically?" "The tree," he said, "and whatever else you'd let me." She considered him. "The tree is not a small task." "I'm aware. Last year it took me 4 hours to decorate because the housekeeper had reorganized the ornament boxes and nothing was where I expected it." "I can find things," he said. "I'm reasonably competent at finding things." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile yet. "Saturday," she said. "We'll do the tree on Saturday." Saturday happened. It was, in Taejun's private assessment, one of the more genuinely difficult projects he had undertaken in recent memory, which was an assessment that said something about his previous relationship to ornament boxes and string lighting. The organizational system Nia used for the Christmas things was entirely her own and followed a logic that was internally coherent but not immediately legible to someone encountering it for the first time, and Taejun spent 40 minutes just understanding the box labeling system before he felt confident enough to retrieve the right things in the right order without disrupting the architecture. He did not ask for help with this. He worked it out. Nia was on the other side of the room threading lights through the lower branches of the tree when he emerged from the storage room with the correct boxes in the correct sequence, and she looked at him with an expression that was surprised, and then not surprised, and then something warmer than either. "How did you— Date system on the boxes," he said. "Most recent on top, which means you add the most used ones last. The categories are spatial rather than thematic. You organized by where on the tree, not by type of ornament." She stared at him. "It took me a while," he said. She laughed. "The real one. They decorated the tree for 3 hours. It was not efficient. He broke one ornament, an older one, which he apologized for with genuine contrition, until she told him it was a Walgreens ornament from 2019, and she'd never liked it. And she made him hold the star at the top while she stood back to check the centering, which required him to hold it in 3 different positions while she looked, and then she chose the first position, and he pointed this out, and she said, "I know, but I needed to see all 3 before I knew which was right." And he absorbed this piece of information about how she operated and stored it. When they were done, they stood back and looked at the tree. The lights were on. The room was dark except for the tree, and the ornaments were catching light in the way of ornaments, and it looked not perfect, because nothing decorated by 2 people with different spatial instincts working together for the first time was going to look perfect, but real. Like something that had been made rather than installed. Nia stood beside him looking at it. "It leans slightly left," she said. "Yes," he said. "We should fix it." "Probably." Neither of them moved. "We'll do it later," she said. "Yes," he said. They didn't fix it. It leaned slightly left through the entire month of December, and neither of them mentioned it again. On Christmas Day, Taejun was home. This required active management. There were things that wanted his attention on Christmas Day, because there were always things that wanted his attention, and the world of Hanyul Crown Holdings did not observe American holidays at the operational level. He managed them in the morning, 2 hours at his desk before 8 o'clock, clearing what could be cleared and delegating what could be delegated, and drawing a line under the rest. At 8:15, he closed his laptop. He went downstairs. Nia was in the kitchen making breakfast, not asking the cook to, not having it prepared, but actually making it herself, which she did on holidays because she liked cooking when it wasn't a performance or a necessity. She was making something with eggs and something else that smelled like it involved the good cheese from the back of the refrigerator, and the kitchen was warm and slightly chaotic in the way of active cooking, and when he appeared, she handed him a spatula without looking up and said, "Don't let those eggs sit." He didn't let the eggs sit. They ate breakfast in the kitchen. Outside, the Westchester morning was white. A light snow had come overnight, the first accumulation of the season, covering the garden in the specific quiet that only snow creates. The tree was visible through the kitchen doorway, leaning its slight left lean. The presents they had placed beneath it were still there. Nia had a rule about opening things at a reasonable hour, which meant after breakfast. After breakfast, they moved to the living room. He had not known what to get her. This was the first time in recent memory that he had confronted this problem honestly, rather than delegating it to his assistant. and confronting it honestly had required him to sit with the uncomfortable fact that he had gotten Nia's gifts wrong for years. Not wrong in the obvious way. He had given her expensive things, correct things, things that communicated wealth and thoughtfulness in the abstract, but wrong in the specific way. The way the white lilies were wrong before he understood about the peonies. He had paid attention for 6 weeks. He had remembered small things she mentioned, casual things, the kind that people say without registering them as information being received. She had mentioned, in passing, a particular author she'd loved as a teenager whose early books had never been reissued and were nearly impossible to find in good condition. She had mentioned twice wanting a particular kind of reading lamp for the East Corridor study, not in a way that asked for it, just in the way you mention something you want but consider impractical to acquire. She had mentioned a weekend pottery class she'd looked at once and not signed up for because the timing had never worked. He had gotten her the out-of-print books, first editions, 3 of them, found through a rare book dealer who required 2 phone calls and more money than he intended to mention. He had found the lamp, and he had enrolled her in a 10-week pottery series beginning in January, which he had written on a card because you could not wrap an enrollment. She opened the books first. She went quiet in the way of genuine surprise, not performed surprise, but the specific stillness of someone whose brain has stalled slightly on an unexpected input. "How did you know about these?" Her voice was careful. "You mentioned the author in November. You said something about reading her when you were 14. She looked at him, then back at the books. She opened the cover of the top one with the particular reverence of a person handling something they thought was lost. "Taijun," she said. "There were 5 titles originally. I could only find 3 in acceptable condition. The other 2 are... I'm still looking." She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright in a way that she was not going to let turn into anything more. She held the books against her chest for a moment. Then she reached under the tree and handed him his gift. It was small, a flat rectangle, wrapped simply. He opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph in a frame he recognized as one she'd had for years. A small wooden frame, well worn, the kind that comes from somewhere personal rather than a store. And inside the frame was a photograph he had never seen. It was him, not the current version, the young man. 29 years old, at the county fair, wearing the gray t-shirt. He was laughing at something out of frame, his head slightly thrown back, his eyes completely gone in the laugh. He looked entirely unguarded. He looked like a person who had not yet learned to be careful. He stared at it. "I had it on my phone for years," she said. "I took it without you knowing. You were laughing at something, and I took it." A pause. "I wanted you to have it, to remember he's still in there." He held the frame in both hands and looked at the young man who had spilled lemonade on his shoes and didn't care and laughed until his eyes disappeared and had no idea what was coming. "I don't always recognize him," Taijun said. "I know," she said. "That's why I wanted you to have the picture." He looked at her. She looked back at him with the clear, steady look of a woman who has survived something difficult and knows it, and is still here anyway, still choosing, still holding her own ground while extending a hand across the distance. He said, "Thank you." 2 words, but the weight of them was everything. In the weeks that followed Christmas, Taejun's legal team received confirmation that the Meridian Group's thin counterclaim had been dropped without prejudice, a legal term that meant they could refile, but which in practical terms meant they had assessed the cost-benefit and found the numbers wrong. The port operation structure was intact. The Inchin families were holding. Hasungjin's second son had declined 3 subsequent approaches from Meridian-linked intermediaries and reported each one to his father and then to Park. Song Jae-won's case was resolved in February. Not publicly, not dramatically, but finally. A settlement involving significant financial penalty, a binding non-disclosure regarding Hanul Crown's operations, and the kind of non-negotiable departure that left no ambiguity about the nature of the ending. Taejun was not present for the final signing. He had done what he needed to do and did not feel the need to witness the formal conclusion. He did not hate Song. He had examined this at length and arrived at the honest answer: he didn't. What he felt was something more complicated, a grief that had not fully resolved and perhaps never fully would, the specific grief of a man who had believed in his own judgment and been wrong in a place that mattered. He would carry that. He thought he probably should. Park told him about the signing in a brief message. Taejun replied, "Thank you, that's all." Then he put his phone in his jacket pocket and went downstairs because it was Saturday morning and he and Nia had made plans that did not involve his phone. The Literacy Center held its spring fundraiser in the third week of March, a Saturday afternoon event, family-friendly, with tables set up in the courtyard of the converted row house when the weather unexpectedly cooperated and a noise level suggesting that several dozen children had been given permission to exist at their full natural volume. Taejun had asked in early March if he could come, not to the fundraiser specifically, to the center, just to see it. He'd asked carefully, because by then he had learned the difference between wanting access to Nia's world and having earned it. She had looked at him. "On a regular afternoon," she said, "not an event. Come on a Tuesday." He came on a Tuesday. He arrived at 3:15 when the after-school session was already running. Denise looked at him from behind the front desk with the expression of a woman recalibrating several prior assessments simultaneously, said hello with professional courtesy, and directed him to the main room where Nia was moving between reading pairs. He stood in the doorway. The room was exactly what she had described over months of conversation. The mismatched chairs, the handmade book reviews on the walls, the lending library with its carefully maintained organizational system. It was also nothing like what he'd imagined, because no description fully prepares a person for the specific texture of a space that is genuinely loved. You can hear about it and still miss what it feels like to stand inside it. He stood in the doorway and watched Nia crouch beside a pair of children and listen to a boy read, her attention complete, her posture entirely without the careful, public-facing quality she carried at the events he had taken her to for 3 years. Here she was just herself, present, warm, competent, in the specific way of someone who has found the thing they're supposed to be doing. A small girl detached from a group near the far bookshelf and walked directly to him. She was perhaps 7, with elaborate braids and an expression of thorough assessment. "Are you Nia's husband?" she said. "Yes," he said. She considered this. "She talks about you now," the girl said. He didn't know what to do with that immediately. "What does she say?" The girl shrugged. "That you're learning." She looked at him with the specific evaluative gaze of a child who has not yet learned to be diplomatic about what she sees. "Are you?" "Yes," he said. "I'm trying." She seemed to find this acceptable. She held out a picture book. "Can you read this?" He looked at the book. He looked up and found Nia watching him from across the room, having registered the interaction, her expression unreadable, but her eyes doing something that was almost amusement and almost something else. He looked at the small girl. "What's your name?" he said. "Maya," she said. He took the book. He looked around, found one of the mismatched reading chairs, and sat down in it. Not comfortably. It was sized for people considerably smaller than him, but he sat in it. Maya climbed into the chair beside him with the self-evidence of a child who has decided something and sees no reason for further deliberation. He opened the book. He read slowly. He was aware on some level of the room continuing around him. The other children, the quiet movement of Nia and Denise between pairs, the low ambient noise of a space full of people in productive work. He read the words on the page with the attention they deserved, and Maya followed along with her finger tracking under each line. And when he reached a page with a complicated word, he sounded it out in full rather than glossing over it, and Maya nodded as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. When the book was done, Maya hugged him. She did it with the complete confidence of a child who has not yet learned to ask permission for affection, and the hug lasted approximately 3 seconds. And then she was gone, sliding out of the neighboring chair and back toward her group with the agility of someone who has already moved on to the next thing. Taejun sat in the small chair. He felt the spot where her arms had been around his neck for a moment after she'd gone, the specific warmth of it, the complete absence of calculation in it. He looked at the closed picture book in his hands. Later, walking back to the car together in the mild March air, he told Nia about Maya's question. "Are you learning?" He told her what he'd answered. Nia was quiet for half a block. "She asks everyone that," Nia said. "It's her thing. She asks it to the volunteers, the parents, the new kids who come in." A pause. "She asked me once." "What did you say?" "I said yes." She walked for another moment. "I was talking about reading, but I think she knew I meant something else too." He looked at her profile in the afternoon light. The particular clarity of her in natural light, without the ballroom chandeliers, and the careful staging of the events he had spent years taking her to without seeing her. "What were you learning?" he said. She thought about it. "How to take up space," she said. "How to be in a room as myself rather than as a position next to someone else." She glanced at him briefly. It took a while. "I know," he said. "I made it harder than it needed to be." "Yes," she said, simply, without softening it. He nodded. He had learned that the right response to her honesty was not defense or apology, but just receiving it, letting it be what it was. They reached the car. She got in on her side. He got in on his. Jin-ho, ever present, ever tactful, pulled smoothly into the flow of afternoon traffic. Nia was looking out her window. He was looking at his hands. "She was right, you know," Nia said, not looking at him. "About what?" "That I talk about you now." A beat. "I didn't used to. For a long time I didn't mention you at all at the center because it was mine, and you weren't in it, so why would I?" He heard what she was not quite saying. "And now?" he said. She turned from the window and looked at him. "Now you're in it a little," she said. "You're becoming someone I mention." A pause, deliberate. "That's not nothing." "No," he said. "It's not." The county fair came back in June, the way it came back every year. The same upstate grounds, the same improbable combination of hay and sugar in summer, the same rigged carnival games operated by people with the patient expressions of those who have watched confident strangers fail at the same task for decades. It was Taijun's idea. He had thought about it for a while before suggesting it, had considered whether it was too deliberate, too staged, the kind of romantic gesture that announces itself and therefore undermines itself. He had decided it was worth the risk because it was honest, because the fair was where they had started, and starting somewhere deliberately was different from pretending you hadn't been places since. He told Nia on a Wednesday evening. He said, "I want to take you somewhere Saturday, the county fair." She looked at him. He watched her understand why. He watched her decide what to do with why. "Okay," she said. They drove up Saturday morning, not in the armored convoy, not with Jin-ho, just Taijun behind the wheel of a car that was still expensive but was singular, and Nia in the passenger seat with the window cracked despite the heat because she liked the air. They talked on the drive, not about anything important. That was the point. The fair was exactly as advertised. The hay smell hit them in the parking lot, and the sounds of the midway reached them before they could see it, and they walked in through the main entrance into a Saturday afternoon crowd of families and teenagers and older couples and everyone in between, and no one in the crowd had any particular reaction to Kang Tae-jun, because to this crowd, he was not Kang Tae-jun of Hanul Crown Holdings. He was a tall man in a casual shirt with a woman beside him, one of several hundred people in the same place for the same reason. He liked it more than he expected. Nia bought a lemonade without irony, and he watched her, and when she turned and caught him watching, she held it out toward him, and he took a sip and handed it back, and neither of them said anything about the time he had spilled one on his shoes 7 years ago, but they were both thinking about it. They walked the midway. They looked at the food stands and the craft tents and the animal exhibition, where an extremely self-possessed goat stared at Taejun with an expression he chose not to interpret. They ate something fried that Nia identified as a corn dog, and which Taejun ate with the specific care of a man who has not eaten a corn dog before but intends to manage it with dignity. He did not manage it with dignity. She laughed. He stood there with mustard on his thumb and looked at her laughing. The full real laugh, the one from the chest, the one he had been thinking about since December of last year, and he felt something that was not complicated at all, simple and clean and exactly where it was supposed to be. Then they reached the ring toss. He stood in front of it. The rings were on their pegs. The man behind the counter had the patient expression. Nia stopped beside him. "You don't have to," she said. "I know." He looked at the game. He looked at the prizes hanging behind the counter, the large, improbable stuffed animals at the back, the smaller ones in the front, and there, on the middle row, a small white bear. He paid. He was not good at the ring toss. He had not been good at it 7 years ago, and he was not good at it now, which was consistent, if not encouraging. The first 3 rings missed by varying margins. He adjusted his approach after each one with the methodical attention of a man who is used to diagnosing problems and iterating. But the game, as Nia had correctly identified years ago, was a scam in multiple dimensions simultaneously. He bought another round, and another. Nia stood beside him. She was not laughing at him. She was watching him with the expression of a woman who has put down something heavy and is standing in the specific lightness of having done so. He was aware of her watching. He adjusted his grip. On the fourth round, seventh ring, something connected. The ring dropped over the peg with the clear plastic knock of an improbable success. The man behind the counter looked mildly astonished. Taejun pointed at the small white bear. He turned and held it out to Nia with both hands, and an expression that he did not try to manage. The slight embarrassment, the real pleasure underneath it, the unguarded quality of a man who has been practicing being unguarded and has not yet perfected it, but is getting there. "I suppose I've improved a little," he said. Nia looked at the bear, then at him. She took it from his hands carefully, the way you take something that is being given rather than offered, and she held it for a moment and then tucked it under her arm. "So have I," she said. They walked on. The afternoon was warm, and the fair noise surrounded them, and the light was the particular golden quality of a June late afternoon that doesn't know it's supposed to end. Taejun's hand was at his side. Nia's was at hers, the small white bear under her other arm. Then she reached across and found his hand. He went still for one breath. Then he held hers. Not the way he had held her arm at the Whitmore event, the deliberate, protective, communicative grip of a man holding what he would not lose. Something less shaped than that. Something quieter. Just his hand around hers, their fingers settling into alignment without instruction. The way two people's hands sometimes simply understand each other after enough time in the same world. They walked like that through the rest of the fair. He didn't talk about what it meant. She didn't either. It didn't require talking about. It was its own statement, complete in itself, requiring no supplementary language. Later, on the drive back, Nia held the small white bear in her lap and watched the country road give way to the highway. The light was fading. The radio was on low. Something quiet, instrumental. Taejun drove with one hand on the wheel and the particular ease of a man who has set something down and found that his hands are lighter for it. "Taejun," she said. "Yes." "What you said at the Whitmore event." She was looking at the road ahead. "That I was what mattered more. That you wanted me to know it before the outcome was clear." He kept his eyes on the road. "Yes. I've been thinking about it for months." "I know." "I needed to think about it for months," she said. "I needed it to not be about the crisis, to not be about Cho or Song or the Meridian Group or any of it. I needed to know that it was real when everything else settled down." He said nothing. He let her get there. "It was real," she said. "Not a question." "Yes," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the highway opened up, the city still an hour ahead of them. "The woman who sat at the table every night is gone," she said. "I told you that." "I remember." "But I'm still here." She turned to look at him, his profile, his hands on the wheel, the small piece of tape long gone from his jaw, but the memory of it still vivid in her mind. "I'm a different version of here. I'm a version that has her own life and her own work and her own ground to stand on, and that doesn't go away because things have gotten better." "I don't want it to go away," he said. "I know." A pause. "I believe you. That's new." He glanced at her briefly. She was looking at him with the clear, direct, entirely unperformed expression that had always been the most real thing about her. The expression that didn't manage him or angle toward him or ask anything of him except the same honesty she was offering. "I have to tell you something," he said. "Okay." "I sent flowers. After the gala. White lilies." He kept his voice level. "I thought they were your favorite. They're not your favorite." She was quiet. "No." "I didn't know," he said. "I had been your husband for 3 years and I didn't know. And when I realized it, it was the thing. It was the specific thing that made it impossible for me to keep telling myself I was present in this marriage. Because it wasn't a small thing. It was the kind of thing you know about someone you love." "Peonies," she said. "I know that now." "You brought them," she said, quietly. "In February. The white peonies. You left them on the kitchen table and you didn't say anything about them. I didn't want to make a speech about knowing your flowers, he said. I just wanted you to have them. She looked at the white bear in her lap for a moment, then at the road ahead. The man at the county fair, she said, the one laughing in the photograph. You asked me once if I thought he was still in there. He had not actually asked her this. It was what the photograph had asked, implicitly. Yes, he said. He is, she said. He got covered over by the money and the power and the whole architecture of the person you built. But he didn't disappear. She turned the small white bear in her hands. I've been watching for him. He swallowed. And? He's been showing up more, she said. Slowly, imperfectly. A slight smile. Like the ring toss. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was in that direction. I'll take imperfect. You should, she said. Imperfect is what's real. They arrived home as the last light was leaving the sky, the estate gate opening as the car approached. The garden was in its early summer state, not the bare winter version, not yet the full green of July, but something in between, the particular in-progress state of things growing toward what they're going to be. Taejun parked. Nia got out with the small white bear. They came in through the side entrance together, the door that was hers, that she had been using for 3 years as her private arrival point, and he followed her in because it was where she went, and he was following her now. Inside, the house was warm and quiet. The tree was long gone, but the lamp from Christmas, the reading lamp in the study, was on, filling the corridor with the particular warm light of something chosen carefully. Nia set the white bear on the kitchen counter. She stood there a moment, looking at it. It leaned slightly left, she said. He looked at it. The bear was sitting with a slight rightward list, actually, but he understood she was thinking about the Christmas tree. We could fix it, he said. No, she said. Leave it. She turned from the counter. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, not quite in, not hovering outside, just in the space between. She looked at him in the warm kitchen light. Come in, she said. He came in. He had spent 15 years building a world where he was always at the center, where all paths led to him, and all decisions flowed through him and all rooms organized themselves around his presence. He had built it because he believed that power meant never needing anyone, that needing was weakness, that the man at the fair with the wrong size shoes and the lemonade problem was someone to leave behind rather than someone to return to. He had been wrong about all of it. The empire was still there. The business was intact, the organizations running, the decisions still flowing through him. None of that had dissolved, but it had been correctly sized, which it had not been before, placed at its right proportion to the other things in a life, rather than crowding out all other things to fill the whole of one. He looked at his wife in the warm kitchen light, and she looked at him, and the distance between them was 3 feet and also 3 years, and also the specific distance that remains when two people have survived something real together and are still here and are choosing, tonight, in this kitchen, with a slightly tilted stuffed bear on the counter and the summer night outside, and the ordinary beautiful machinery of the rest of their lives ahead of them, to stay. I love you, he said. He had not said it in a long time. He had said it in the early years, easily, the way you say things that feel permanent and therefore require no reinforcement. And then he had stopped saying it the way you stop doing the things you assume require no maintenance. And by the time he understood the error, the silence had grown so long that the words had started to feel insufficient, too small for what they needed to carry, too easily said to mean what he needed them to mean. He said it now because it was true, and because she deserved to hear it said by a man who understood what it cost. Nia looked at him. Her eyes were bright. She did not look away from him, and she did not speak immediately. She let it sit in the room and breathe, the way real things need to. Then, I know, she said. A pause. I love you too, she said. I always have. Even when I was trying to stop. Even when I was trying to stop. He heard everything in that sentence. The 3 years, the gala, the empty plates, the turning away, the long cold work of learning to live without someone you love because they have given you no other option. He heard the cost of it. He heard that she was still here despite it, which was not a debt he could ever fully repay, and which he intended to spend the rest of his life attempting. I know, he said. And they stood in the kitchen of the house that was now actually their home. Not his residence, not the estate, not the fortified property of a man who ran his world from behind walls. And the summer night pressed gently against the windows, and the small white bear leaned its slight lean on the counter, and the warm lamplight held them both. He reached for her hand. She gave it. Not the careful public hand-holding of the Whitmore event, not the brief charged touch of her hand on his shoulder at 1 in the morning, just her hand in his, familiar now in the specific way of things that have been chosen rather than simply claimed. The weight of it, the warmth, the particular way her fingers settled against his. They stood like that for a while, not saying anything, not needing to. The empire could wait, the meetings could wait. The decisions and the negotiations and the carefully maintained architecture of a world built on discipline and leverage and the controlled performance of strength, all of it would be there tomorrow, and he would return to it tomorrow, and he would do the work. But he would do it as a man who had learned at considerable cost that the greatest thing he had ever built was not anything with a market value or a legal structure or a footprint in 3 countries. It was this, the specific, ordinary, irreplaceable choice to be here. To be known, to be the man in the photograph, imperfect, unguarded, laughing at himself in wet shoes, rather than only the man the world feared. Nia's hand was warm in his. The kitchen light held them. Outside, the Westchester summer night was full and quiet, and the stars were where they had always been, and the world went on being exactly as large and indifferent and full of possibility as it had always been. And Kang Tai-jun, who had once laughed at his wife in front of 300 people because it was easy, and because he didn't understand what he was throwing away, stood in his own kitchen and held her hand and understood, finally, fully, in the way that understanding arrives only after a long and honest reckoning, that love had never needed to change him. It had only ever needed him to choose it. He held her hand carefully, and for the first time in